Good morning and welcome to the 18th meeting of the Education, Children and Young People Committee in 2025. This morning we are taking evidence in our final session on the Tertiary Education and Training, Funding and Governance Scotland Bill at Stage 1, where we will hear from the Minister and his officials. Can I welcome Graham Day, Minister for Higher and Further Education and Minister for Veterans, Andrew Mott, Head of Legislation and CLD Unit, Kath Henderson, Apprenticeship Team Leader, and Alison Martin, Solicitor. Thank you all for joining us. And before we move to members' questions, we're going to begin with an opening statement from the Minister. Minister.
Many thanks, Convener, and thank you for inviting me to give evidence on the bill. Let me start by underscoring the significance of this bill. As Cara Reid of Prosper told the committee, it's an important step in reforming the skills landscape. For the first time, we are placing apprenticeships on a statutory footing. This clearly signals the high value we place on them to drive economic growth and create high-quality opportunities for learners. And crucially, this reform underscores the parity of esteem between vocational and academic pathways, recognising the changing needs of learners for more flexible earn-as-you-learn models. Looking at how this will be delivered in terms of provision, we will maintain a mixed economy, and colleges, universities, independent training providers and others will remain important partners in this landscape. Furthermore, this step allows us to simplify the funding arrangements, consolidating from 3 funding bodies to 2. And that directly responds to the complex and fragmented funding environment identified by James Withers in his review, which was not simply an opinion, but an independent and thorough review of the present offering, which very much aligned with what I've heard from across the landscape and which, as I recall, was welcomed by all parties. The system is fragmented, with the component parts too often defending their bit. This bill is reflective of our taking an overarching view, creating a coherent post-16 offering which has all parts working to optimal effect within a clearly understood framework. But whilst this bill and the simplification of funding are a fundamental part of our wide-ranging reform of post-school education and training, this isn't happening in isolation. We are simultaneously moving to invigorate career services, strengthen our national skills approach with SDS and SFC, reforming apprenticeships and improving the qualifications offer. These collective actions are designed to elevate the experience and achievements of learners and employers. But as the SFC's remit expands, it's logical that the organisation evolves too. In fact, the SFC will effectively become a new organisation. This bill will update the SFC's governance and oversight of tertiary education, which we expect to lead to better experiences and outcomes for learners. I want to acknowledge the considerable and valuable work our SDS colleagues have done over the years to build our apprenticeship programme to where it is today, particularly their leadership in employer engagement. Let me be clear. We aim to build upon this strong foundation, not diminish the offering, and we will be calling on the expertise of the staff who would transfer to the new organisation to help shape the future nature of the offering. I hope the committee can agree that at its heart this bill is driven by a universally shared commitment to deliver the absolute best service we can for learners, employers and the economy. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much, Minister. Can I begin by asking, we've taken a number of evidence sessions on this, which I'm sure you have followed. There has been little appetite that this is the real priority for this sector at the moment. How would you respond to that?
So, as I said a moment ago, if we're blunt about it, it is a very fragmented landscape with every component part pushing its significance, its relevance, its importance. And I think that's come out in the evidence. I recognise that in the current economic climate, it's inevitable that people will say, well, there are immediate problems that need to be confronted. I would contend, Convener, that we are confronting some of those problems, particularly in the economy space, and we may come to that later in the session. But this bill was deemed, what this bill delivers was deemed necessary by James Withers. That hasn't changed. We do need to make fundamental and structural changes to the offering, regardless of the immediate circumstances we find ourselves in. But I stress there are 2 separate things here. There's some of the immediate work we're doing in response to some of the challenges. This is about creating a coherent post-16 landscape, which I think is widely recognised as necessary.
So who supports this change?
Well, I think, Convener, if you go beyond, if you look at some of the evidence you took, there are organisations who have said that They have some immediate concerns, but they do see the potential merits in the bill. And if you go back to when Withers was published, there was widespread support in the Parliament and out with for what he was proposing. If you remember, Withers wanted us to go further, to move to a single funding body with the merits that he expressed around that. I've taken the view that that would be too big a leap to make at the moment, and I'm sure we'll go on to explore the various reasons why this is necessary. But there is support out there for this.
So from who? Because, I mean, our evidence has just been there was a lack of enthusiasm. You know, we're in the final year of this parliamentary term. There are a lot of challenges in this sector, and people were not banging down our door to say this is the bill we would like to see not rush through Parliament, taken through Parliament in the final stages. And I've got the COSLA letter in front of me. They're not in favour of this. We got a letter from Western Isles Council as one of the members of COSLA yesterday. They're not in favour of this. SDS clearly have concerns. Basically, the most supportive was from the Funding Council, who gain a lot of functions and extra funding from you on this.
I don't think that that's a fair description of the situation, because
so can you tell us who it is that is supporting it?
Let me explain what I mean by that. If you look at reform in the round, there is a huge amount of support for all of the measures. This is a component part of it. Now, I understand the argument that says, right now, in the context of funding and how funding is delivered, is this our most pressing ask? Well, all of these organisations, convener, if you look through the evidence, were looking for immediate funding boosts. But if I take you back to the consultation in 2024, 80% of the people who responded and the organisations were in favour of this proposal, 80%.
Does that not then suggest you've got something wrong with the bill? Because they're in favour of the principle, and people do want a more streamlined skills landscape. I don't think we had anyone saying, no, don't do that. But there are concerns of what you've brought forward, and we'll get into the cost, but I don't know if you can tell us now how much you think this change will cost, is going to be over and above the benefits of what a streamlined skills landscape will deliver.
This is about delivering a coherent landscape, which is sadly lacking at the moment, and we'll no doubt interrogate some of the detail of that in the next couple of hours. This is an absolutely necessary piece of legislation. It is not by any means the end game. It's nothing like it. But it's important for what it enables. It enables us to deliver many of the other aspects of reform which the whole sector, the whole landscape will benefit from.
So how much do you think this bill will cost to implement?
So I saw the assertions from SDS. I actually struggle to see where they got those numbers.
Have you asked them?
Well, I would suspect what they have done has looked...
Sorry, just on that, have you asked them?
No, we have not. Well, I'm not aware that we have asked them, because we don't recognise that number. We absolutely don't. What we did for the benefit of the committee and wider stakeholders was to outline the range of possible costs. Now, we've gone from extremely optimistic to extremely pessimistic. We are working through what the actual cost will be, and we would anticipate being able to furnish the committee with that detail in due course, certainly before stage 2.
Why can't you do it now?
Because
it's
a very complex issue that requires a lot of detail that we cannot currently access, but we are working on that. I didn't want to come to committee and...
Just to be clear, what can't you access, and what couldn't you access when you knew this committee was scrutinising this for some time? You were speaking about a consultation from a couple of years ago. What will you get in the next couple of months between now and September, should we recommend approving this bill at stage 1, that you couldn't have got in the last few months to allow us to have a proper consideration of the costs?
We will be able to move forward over the next few months in ascertaining greater detail. So let's take the figure that was quoted of £30 million. We think that is SDS putting the two figures that are in the numbers that we've provided, the range of figures. At the very highest end, there's a bit added on to that, and the figure of 30 million is mentioned. We don't believe it will cost anything like that. But we have a responsibility to interrogate this to the nth degree, to get all of the detail we require. And what I would say to you is this, convener. These are one-off costs that we're talking about. let's say that the figure that we end up with is midway between the lowest point and the highest point, £15 million. That will be taken account of over an extended period of time. If you judge this in the context of the cost of £15 million over a 5-year period, over a 10-year period, it's not £30 million set against 1 year's budget. It's a one-off expenditure. So we will, whatever that amount of money is, we will look to fund that internally within government, not to the detriment of the funding for apprenticeships. I want to make that clear. So we will come back to the committee with a very accurate figure. That's what we intend to do.
I'm sorry, I'm going to press you. What's been withheld from you? What couldn't you get for us for our stage 1 deliberation? You know this has come up in evidence, Mr. Mott.
I'll bring Andrew.
Convener, yes. The biggest uncertainty is the shortfall payment for transferring pensions. And that can't be calculated with any accuracy until you know the exact staff. It's not something you can model by saying it's 140 staff and therefore this. But
you won't know the exact staff at the end of stage 1. And the Minister just committed to bringing this back before stage 2.
There's a process to work
Sorry,
through.
just on that point. You won't know that before stage 2?
On that point, we're working out our delivery plans with the 3 public bodies. And as the Minister says, we'll provide you with further information as soon as we have it. There's a process to go through. For everybody's sake, we'd obviously like to be able to identify the specific staff affected as soon as possible, but there's a process we need to go through to do that. And that's the biggest uncertainty in the numbers. It's worth saying...
So if the process works as you envisage, when would we get that information?
Well, as the Minister says, as soon as we can. I can't give you a specific date.
Well, why not?
This is a process we're having to work through with the affected agencies.
Yeah, yes, I know, but you've known you'd have to work through that.
So
it's not unknown. It's not something that has just been sprung upon you. Indeed, it came up in our evidence last week.
Just to be clear, so the financial memorandum was based on numbers that the 3 public bodies gave us. So we did, an awful lot of work was done in the autumn of 2024 to develop an outline business case, which was published on the 22nd of January, and to develop the financial memorandum. So we used publicly available data and numbers they provided us to come up with the estimates in the financial memorandum. The one number that we can't put a figure on is this shortfall payment. So what we did in the financial memorandum there was we gave 5 case studies as an illustrative range. And what that showed was that it could be $1 million to $23 million as an illustrative range. But we've not called them estimates because they're not estimates. For all the other numbers in the financial memorandum, we've been able to sort of quantify a minimum cost and a maximum cost. But for this, it would be misleading to the committee to say that it's a minimum of 1 million and a maximum of 23. And
in fairness, other members will tease that out, and I don't want to step on any toes. But I'm still unsure. So we've got to produce a report. That report will then be scrutinised by the government and voted on by Parliament. At what stage will parliamentarians who are voting on the general principles of this and potentially then amendments and the final bill know the cost?
As soon as we can possibly provide it accurately.
But when in that process is it? I'm not saying October the 13th. I'm saying before our report is concluded, before the stage 1 debate, before or after amendments at stage 2, before or after stage 3 is passed by Parliament. You must be able to give that answer.
Certainly our ambition is to give you it as quickly as possible, but I would anticipate we'd be able to do that before the stage 1 debate.
And Mr Mott, do you agree with that? Because you were suggesting it wouldn't be before stage 2.
Well, we need
just do you agree with the Minister that we will get this before the stage 1 debate?
We will give you all the information we can at every stage in the process.
But are you comfortable that the Minister is committing to giving that to Parliament before the stage 1 debate?
Well,
it's just a yes or no.
Well, we're at the final stages of doing the delivery planning with the public bodies. So I would hope that we could do that. But to make progress on this, it's not. We need the public bodies to work with us, and we need to agree a plan with them, and we're at the final stages of doing that. So.
And And once that's done, we can move at greater pace.
Okay. Willie Rennie.
If the Minister says before stage 1, I would just say yes. But anyway. So I expressed quite clear support for Withers, expressed support for the process in the Parliament. I have to say I have been overwhelmed by two things: the strength of the opposition, and secondly, the timidity of the support for the bill. The Minister will have seen and heard the evidence sessions. In summary, they say it's a costly distraction from the challenges that are ahead, and it breaks potentially the relationship with employers. But the conveners covered, that point, and you may wish to come back on it. But I just wanted to state that's my summary of the evidence. But let me just try and focus on something a little bit different. Can the Funding Council cope with this change? So we had the previous interim chief executive and now chief operating officer, who was less than convincing before us. In fact, he had to write again to clarify what he should have said in the meeting. He was in charge of that organisation not so long ago. We've had the crisis at the University of Dundee, which we still don't have a resolution to. We've got universities right across Scotland, colleges right across Scotland that are facing financial problems. Can this organisation cope? And I know the Minister says it will be a new organisation, but is it capable of creating a new organisation with all of that going on?
I know SFC have acknowledged, have written to the committee in greater detail, and I'm not going to comment on the evidence that was given at the time. But I do recall, I think it was Paul Grice, expressing considerable confidence to the committee in the capabilities of the organisation under its new leadership, and I would reinforce that.
It wasn't unqualified, though. He did say that, I paraphrase, is yet to be determined, or something to that effect. So but it wasn't unbridled.
No, but he did say what I've just said, and I would echo that. We have a new chief executive in the SFC. We're about to have a new chair. We will transfer across the expertise of the senior staff in SDS who deal with apprentices. We have an opportunity this year to enhance the board. There are a number of board appointments to be made. Self-evidently, those will involve people with expertise in employer engagement. I'm sorry, we start with some of the evidence that you got about other possibilities in there. I think the organisation, well, it'll be bolstered numbers-wise and expertise-wise. I've absolutely no doubt that the organisation has the capability to deal with that. It's committed to dealing with it. It has been working with the government over a period of time already, looking at what that might look like in practice. We have a period of time between now, hopefully the Parliament passing the bill at stage 1, and implementation, which allows us to ramp this up at pace. I understand the point you make, Mr Rennie, about some of the challenges in the college sector, the university sector, etc., etc. And I don't pretend that this isn't a challenging time all round. But I go back to what I've said before. This bill was a good idea at the time. It was well supported. The principles in the consultation were supported. It remains a good idea. In fact, in some regards, it's even more important that we progress this bill now. I don't accept it's a distraction. I think it's a necessary piece of work that needs to be carried out to knock this post-16 landscape into the kind of shape we need it to be in for the future of the country, both in terms of the benefit of our learners, but also the needs of the economy. I think it's an essential piece of work that needs to take place, and we can and will do that whilst dealing with the day job.
But it didn't see, I don't want to get into the depths of this, but it didn't see Dundee coming, and it's missed the opportunity on many other problem areas. And then secondly, the apprenticeship funding will be dwarfed by college and university funding. can we be confident that when the spotlight's off, that the leadership of the organisation will treat apprenticeships with the priority that it deserves, that it currently gets within SDS?
It most definitely will, because apart from anything else, there will be clear ministerial direction about the importance of apprenticeships.
The spotlight will be off for you as well.
This government is absolutely committed to enhancing the apprenticeship offering in all its guises, whether it be MAs or graduate apprenticeships, for example. There is an absolute commitment. This is critical to the needs of the economy, the apprenticeship offering. We're in the business of improving it. With regard to your initial point, I would just caution that we should await the Pamela Gillis report into Dundee.
But the truth is that it didn't spot anything.
It didn't, but one might argue perhaps that the court at the university didn't really spot this problem coming. And that's why I've been, as I've said this to the committee before, I'm committed to a process whereby we will look at what comes out of Pamela Gillis's report, as the committee will. We are engaged with the sector more widely around if there is anything that we could do in terms of stage 2 amendments around improving the governance arrangements, both regarding the SFC's oversight, but also the courts, the local oversight. So if I offer an example of one of the things we've been looking at, we've looked at the possibility of, if you like, getting ahead of the game, which is monitoring the cash reserves of the universities on a bi-monthly basis. It's just something we've been looking at as a possibility, because that would potentially give an earlier signal of any emerging issue if their cash reserves were going down. Now, it's not as straightforward as that, because a number of universities operate revolving cash facilities, credit facilities, forgive me. So there are a number of conversations going on around what would better governance look like, both to support the individual courts and the SFC if that's necessary. Perhaps more powers around the ability to compel the provision of information. But we do really need to wait and see what comes out of the Pamela Gillis report in relation to Dundee. I met with the chairs of court a couple of months ago. They're doing a piece of work, not just in Scotland but across the UK, looking at improved governance opportunities, things that we could do better. They're going to come back to us with some recommendations. So we're absolutely committed to that. I don't accept that what happened in Dundee, that the blame lies at the door of the SFC, but let's see what Pamela Gillis says.
See, I think you make my point for me. You just described a lot of inquiries, a lot of potential changes in powers and responsibilities, at the same time as transferring a responsibility for delivering a service rather than commissioning or transferring funds to other bodies to deliver the service. So it's a different type of function. So the apprenticeships model with the SDS, they're delivering it. Whereas with the college and university funding, the colleges and universities are delivering. So it's a different model, it's a different setup, and it's dwarfed by the college and university funding. So in all of that context, has it got a hope of getting the priority? Even if ministers think it's important, you do need somebody like the Chief Executive of SDS currently does to actually champion apprenticeships, to make sure it gets the all-year-round support that it deserves and needs, for the reasons you've set out. But I think you've made the point. There's a lot going on in colleges and universities. With all of that transfer, why are we shifting something that actually is opposed by so many people, and is the supporters of it are so tepid in their support?
But I go back to what I said to you. In the consultation, there was 80% support for this move. People, I think there's a bit of a conflation between some current challenges, which I fully accept are significant, and the need to do this. And I think people have fundamentally recognised the need to do it. They were in favour of the need to do it. And they've taken the opportunity that the bill has presented to highlight the challenges they have currently, some of the issues they have, but fundamentally the need for this bill remains, the need for the change it brings.
Okay, thank you.
Just to go back to Willie Rennie's point, you were very clear that the apprenticeship funding would be secure, it wouldn't in any way be diluted, and the Chief Operating Officer was equally adamant that that wouldn't happen. But those are very strong words, but no more than that. There is no guarantee. You speak about ministerial direction. How would that work, given the ONS classification with the Funding Council? Because many times in the Chamber, ministers have said, we are giving money to the Funding Council, but then they couldn't direct it to go to Dundee University. So how would this be different? And is there therefore a need, if there is still concern that, while the words are welcome, they're no more than words, that the funding should actually be ring-fenced or something in the legislation to say that money can only and will only be spent on apprenticeships?
So ONS classification pertains to universities?
Yes. But I'm saying, in that example, with Dundee University, you said, ministers said, they couldn't direct that money. So that was, it's slightly different, I accept, but that was money going from the government to the SFC, which you could not direct the SFC to spend because of ONS classification. In this case, you are putting money to the SFC and you are saying you can direct it. So I understand there's a difference between going to universities and apprenticeships, but it's just this theme that quite often ministers will say, well, you know, we are not going to direct bodies such as that. Should there be something in this legislation that specifically does direct it, and should that money be ring-fenced?
I'll bring Andrew in on the drafting of the legislation.
Thank you.
Maybe just before, are you against or in favour of apprenticeship funding being ring-fenced in the new apprenticeship budget? The apprenticeship funding going to the Funding Council. Would you be in favour or adverse to that?
I have made a commitment to the government's view about the importance of apprenticeship. If there is a view brought forward in your Stage 1 report that you would want to see something in the bill that reinforced that, I'm happy to consider it, Convener.
But you're not. You don't have a view yourself.
I don't. No,
I'm trying to tease this out.
So from my perspective, looking at this from the position of the Minister, who's absolutely committed to apprenticeships and sees this growing, not reversing, I don't see a problem here, because I think the direction of travel, if you look at the appetite for earn-as-you-learn type models, if you look at the university sector moving more towards graduate apprenticeships, wanting to enhance this, and the need of the economy to it's because of the cost of living crisis, it is more challenging for young people to embark on some of these courses. And therefore, I would envisage moving forward more of an emphasis on earn-as-you-learn type models. So I don't see an issue here at all. But if the committee takes the view that it would like some reassurance, then we're happy to consider that.
Mr. Mott.
Thank you. No, I was just going to make the point that as in the 2005 Act now, ministers have powers to fund the SFC, to fund university provision, college provision, to set terms and conditions on that funding, and those terms and conditions can be cascaded. That the structure in the bill sort of replicates that for apprenticeship and national training programmes. So all the same safeguards that would apply to, say, college funding and university funding would apply in this situation as well. They're not a sort of weaker or more inferior sort of...
You must accept it is wholly different with this legislation if you look at the quantum. The quantum being spent by the government through the Funding Council on universities and colleges, apprenticeships are already dwarfed with that. And that's why there is concern from our witnesses that there is a risk to that funding merging into other pots.
Appreciate that. I just wanted to say that potentially the number of SDS staff that are transferred to the SFC to do this might exceed the number of SDS staff in the SFC now. So although the funding might be of a maybe an order of a magnitude smaller, it's not, apprenticeship provision isn't going to get dwarfed. It's not like 3 people joining a huge organisation. It's much more, as the Minister said in his opening remarks, the SFC is in effect going to be a new organisation. It's got a new chief executive. It's going to have a new chairperson. It's going to have a lot of new council members as the natural turnover takes place. There's going to be an apprenticeship committee, a statutory committee of the SFC with employers and other representatives on that committee to drive the apprenticeship work forward. So I think it's not right to present apprenticeships as a little tag on. It's a sort of new organisation.
In terms of the quantum, it's a massive difference.
In terms of the money,
yes.
But in terms of the presence within the new SFC is going to be massive.
So what is going to be the difference then?
In what sense?
Well, in terms of the number of staff, because I thought you didn't know that. You didn't know who's in
Well, we don't know the
schools,
exact quantum, but you're talking about in excess of 100 people.
So I think SFC has, is it 140 or 150, something like that number at the moment. I need to just check that. And then we haven't, as the Minister was saying, we need to work out the exact number of staff to be transferred, but it's something like 150 to 175 FTE is the estimate in the financial memorandum. So it's an equivalent number, roughly speaking, to the existing cohort in SFC.
So far from being, as Andrew says, an add-on to the organisation, it's going to become a critical part of SFC's activities. And the government's view is that there needs to be a growth in apprenticeships, numerically and quality-wise.
But the budget that more than 50% of the staff will be responsible for will pale into insignificance compared to the colleges and the university budget.
In that sense, it does. I can't disagree with you in that, but I don't think we could have made it any clearer, convener, that in every respect, the new organisation will have a huge emphasis within it on apprenticeship delivery.
Okay, thank you. Pam Duncan-Clancy.
Thank you, convener. Good morning to Minister and officials. I think so. I share some of the concerns that I've heard from other members, and I'm not convinced, as some of the evidence that we've had, that the bill addresses the actual problems. In fact, some have suggested that structural change isn't what's needed; it's leadership. And so we've got, the need to grow apprenticeships. Modern apprenticeship starts are below the pre-pandemic level. Foundation apprenticeships are capped and demand is still clear. Graduate apprenticeships are static. SAB said that the model itself was stagnant and rigid. And we know that positive destinations for people leaving at S4 are going down, and tens of thousands of young people in Scotland are not in education, employment or training. And the way that people have characterised the problems here is not that we need structural change, but that there are cultural barriers that are holding back work-based learning, that there's demand for training in technical and engineering-based occupations that outstrip supply, skills shortages in various areas. So can the Minister set out how the bill is going to address any of that, and when we can expect to see more people enjoying an apprenticeship?
So it's a very good question, a very fair question. The bill does not in itself achieve any of that. That's not what it's about. It's the enabling that it creates. So let me talk about, in the context of the other work that's taking place to try and address some of these issues. We are doing a lot of work on skills planning, because we need to make sure that we are providing the apprenticeships that are needed both for the economy and to give sustainable long-term employment to the very people that you're talking about. We're doing an extensive piece of work taking us right the way back to the careers offering in the country, because we need to improve that. We need to support people into making the right choices. We've got two individual work streams taking place on foundation apprenticeships that you've touched upon and graduate apprenticeships. And if you bear with me, convener, I want to explain those in a little bit of detail. So if you take foundation apprenticeships, there's an assessment being done on their effectiveness and the wider vocational offering in schools. So you heard in evidence about the excellent offering that's available in Aberdeenshire on FAs, but it's not universal. It's nothing like universal. I visited another part of the country. I've talking to a business there who had the experience of being given 3 foundation apprentices by the local authority, none of whom were remotely interested in the work of that business. Now, that is a waste of resource. It's a waste of time for the young people concerned. And there is an element, I think, at times of local authorities using foundation apprenticeships as a means of getting disruptive young people out of classrooms, regardless about whether they're placing them somewhere that suits their interests and their talent. So we're looking at that closely, set alongside the vocational offering, because, for example, there's a fantastic piece of work being done by New College, Lanarkshire, with their local authority, where they're delivering HNCs in 6th year in school. So we're looking at that in the round with a view to getting that offering into the kind of shape it needs to be. On graduate apprenticeships, again, we have a work stream well underway led by the principal of Glasgow Caledonian University. I charged him with the task of coming back to me with a model that would be more wide-ranging and better aligned to the needs of the economy. He's been given a blank sheet of paper to get on and do that for us. And that's an example of the opportunity that this bill presents, because as we take apprenticeships into a different setting, we are interrogating every aspect of how they're currently delivered, how they could be made to be better than they currently are. I have a lot of conversations with some of the very stakeholders the committee's heard from expressing concerns about the opportunities that arise from this move. Because if we're honest, SDS were clear that they don't see there's an issue here. They don't think there's a problem to fix, particularly around MA delivery. I do think that, and I hear that loud and clear from stakeholders. We've spent a lot of time engaging with stakeholders since Withers came out. And if I give you some examples about some of which have been raised with the committee, the kind of things that the bill will enable us to tackle through the work that's already well underway. Fiona Ray of Tullis Training talked about a bureaucracy that had grown up around apprenticeship delivery. I've heard that from elsewhere, particularly amongst private training providers. That's something we're going to be exploring. The committee has heard about the situation involving managing agents and how they operate and the retention of a sizable proportion of the monies that are given as a contribution to training. Again, that's an issue we've been heavily involved in because it troubles me. The fact that we have a process currently which can see the allocation of apprenticeships run over more than 1 year, a 1+1 model. It ties our hands if we want to be more agile. If we've identified a pressing need within the economy, engineering would be a case in point, and we want to pivot a little bit the following year to put a focus on there. Well, our hands are tied under the current model.
But Minister, how does the new model reduce the bureaucracy in untying your hands in that respect?
So the point I'm making is it creates an opportunity for us to do this differently. We know what the issues are, and we have the opportunity by moving this into a different organisation to tackle the problems that we've got. Another example of that is, roughly speaking, in any year, 10% of the apprenticeships that are allocated at the start of the year come back into the system because they've gone unfilled. And that, to me, is not a sign of a successful approach, because what it does is when these apprenticeships are reallocated, there are sometimes challenges, engineering is a case in point, in getting the training, particularly if you're going through the college sector, because the college year has already started. So there's a number of things that we know need to be fixed. SDS were clear they don't believe that a number of these are particularly an issue. Moving this into the different organisation gives us the opportunity to tackle these issues and others. So
well, first of all, I don't think those were the I don't think SDS denied that those were the concerns. In fact, I think some of the things that the Minister just outlined around the inflexibility, the fact that the apprenticeships go back into the system, the fact that colleges are, quite frankly, in a really perilous situation as a result of decisions that have been taken in other parts of the portfolio that the Minister holds. For all of these reasons, the SDS and others said those were the concerns for apprenticeships. Federation of Small Business said that it was becoming much more difficult for them to afford to be able to take on apprentices. So those are the problems. The bill doesn't seem to address any of those things. And in fact,
but the bill was never designed to... just to be clear, this is quite a narrow bill. It enables us to kick off tackling those issues. That's what it does. So
is the bill then the government's answer to not being able to provide the leadership that's needed through the organisations that currently exist? Because that's what it sounds like.
It's not about providing leadership to the organisations that currently exist. It is about, we have spent a long period of time on the back of the Withers Review exploring what works well in the system, what doesn't work so well. This is the opportunity to come at this from a fresh direction.
But I don't think anybody has put to us that the bureaucratic structural change is what doesn't work well and needs to happen. But just on a specific point of the move, and I can see, Mr Mott, that you're looking to come in, I'll just finish this part, and then one of the concerns we've heard as part of this move is that SDS has got stronger links with business and industry than the SFC, and they've worried about that. The Minister spoke about the need for a connection between careers advice and schools, what happens with national skills planning, and, of course, apprenticeships. All of that is going to be dismantled by taking one part of the SDS product and putting it elsewhere. So what's the Minister's response to the concern that business and industry won't be able to influence it and therefore won't be able to address some of the key issues that are actually the barriers to young people accessing apprentices?
Well, if anything, we want to enhance business involvement in all of this across the whole gamut. You talked about careers. We need greater business input to the careers offering. There's a challenge for business in there. Around skills planning, that's being enhanced. We've done already...
Well, PCS said that skills planning, PCS, the union, said that skills planning would be more difficult because you'd be pulling out a key part of an organisation that's got a link into employers into another organisation, leaving the career service part of it without those crucial links.
I don't accept that at all. I mean, the work that's been done on skills planning in this instance would see the existing functions still sit within those two organisations, with the government taking an overarching lead. So I don't think anything is being pulled out here. And you can deliver, you can focus on careers, and careers is about more than SDS, it's about much more than SDS. Yeah, it's about all the component parts of the careers collaborative doing their bit. It's a bit of a conflation at the moment around this is all about careers advisors in schools. It's far from it. All of this work comes together in an overarching vision for the post-16 landscape. And I don't accept that by taking apprenticeships from where they are currently and put them elsewhere creates that difficulty. On the point about SFC, SFC already has considerable engagement in a variety of ways with business. But in this space, I fully accept the point that the member makes. But we have, since day one in this process, been engaging directly with business, both myself and the team directly. We've got an employer group set up that met a couple of weeks ago, particularly looking at apprenticeships in the first instance, but it's been broadened out beyond that. And there will be an apprenticeship committee provided within SFC, a broader committee than perhaps the one that currently operates under the title of SAB within SDS. So there's extensive work around that, because this is about making the offering better than it currently is. And in the context, by the way, of the employer engagement and the committee in SFC, I think some of the evidence you've taken from various stakeholders has been quite useful about how we could expand that.
So one of the other things that business has said is that the system needs to be much more agile, more flexible, and if the college's first approach is the approach of the government, there needs to be a different relationship and there needs to be a different offering so that business can access what it needs from colleges, and colleges are empowered to do what they know they need to do in an agile space. So what will the bill do to change any of that?
Well, I agree with them about agility. I absolutely agree with them. And I don't think the current system is nearly agile enough. But the member obviously missed what I said in my opening remarks. Yes, I'm aware that James Withers called for a college's first approach, but that's not the starting point for us, because we believe the best interests of the learner and the employer are served by a mixed economy, private and public training providers. I made that clear when I spoke at the Scottish Training Federation annual conference last year, that was a conclusion I had reached. I was a little bit surprised to hear some private training providers are still of the view that we will take a college's first approach. But I reinforced that with the Training Federation CEO and chair just last week, and I'm meeting a group of their members shortly to tease out some of their concerns around apprenticeship delivery. I mean, I've spent a lot of time looking at this point, because it is a recommendation of Withers that we go with the college's first model. But the fact of the matter is that in some instances, private training providers have a better offering. They have better kit. They are able to bring that together. If you go to the National Training College in Shinnon, you see the offering they've got. If you visit the Arnold Clark Motor Trade training facility, they do have an offering that is stronger than many of our colleges. So there's a balance to be struck here between what the colleges are strong on and can deliver to, and then the private training providers, and that's the road we're going down.
What do you then? What does the Minister therefore think the role of colleges in all of this is then?
I think the role of colleges remains an important one. I think there are opportunities, and I don't want to get into too much detail, but because there are conversations take place where you could have colleges coming together to create centres of excellence in particular disciplines, and there is an appetite for that. You could have them coming together to take on the role of managing agents, perhaps. That's another opportunity that arises from this move, so that the monies that the committee have heard about remain much more within the public sector. So that all of these conversations are well underway, and we're open, and this is what I keep going back to, making this change. What the bill does is it allows us to deal with these issues that have been brought to us by James Withers and by others. That's what it does.
Finally then, Minister, Women's Enterprise Scotland said that business engagement with women's businesses, or engagement with women's businesses, is not what it should be, and that the bill doesn't do anything to address that. So what's the Minister's response to that, and what could he foresee as being a solution in the bill?
So I will absolutely take that point on board, if that is a concern that they have. One of the good pieces of work that was done by SAB, led by Natalie Buxton, was a review of gender issues right across the landscape, and I'm pleased that Natalie's agreed to continue to work with us, because we want to weave that into all of the reform work, not to have it as a separate work stream, but to weave that in. I will absolutely take away that concern about women in enterprise, women in business organisations, and I'll commit today to meet with them to hear directly from them on the specific concerns they've raised.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'll take in George Adam at this point.
Up on the SDS side of things, Minister. Basically, Damien Yates came in here with a narrative that only he could deliver. SDS are doing a fantastic job and only he can deliver. Now, I can understand that narrative because he feels his organisation is under threat. He's doing some work there, so I get where he's coming from. But he was very forthright about it, and he also liked what he had to say about it. But one of the things that he did say was Withers was just a point of view. Now, what do you think of that when someone is part of a government organisation comes out with a statement like that independent review at Withers is just a point of view?
I don't think anyone in this room, and forgive me if I'm being presumptuous, thinks that Withers was just an opinion, a point of view. It was a very, very extensive piece of work. It was carried out by a highly credible and respected individual. I don't know about other members in the room, but when I read the Withers report, I realised when I came to the end of the process, I had sat and nodded in agreement with pretty much everything. And the work that I've done in the period since then, engaging with business, with various stakeholders, has just reinforced that. But to come back to your point, Mr Adam, about some of the evidence from SDS, the Chief Executive was clearly proud of the fact that 76% of apprentices complete. And I recognise that that is a better performance than elsewhere on these islands. But I'm not proud of the fact that 1 in 4 apprentices doesn't complete. I don't think that's success. I don't think some of the retention rates in a number of our colleges are good enough. We've got to aspire to do better. Now, there are lots of factors in young people not completing college or not completing apprenticeships, and these are often out with the control of those who are charged with delivering the programmes. And we all know in this committee that the way in which we measure college retention is a bit unfair in colleges. Nevertheless, we need to improve the completion rates, and that's where the read across to other areas of reform come in. This is where that careers offering, getting that right, is so important, because at the moment we have too many square pegs and round holes. That's what's happening in reality. It's one of the major contributory factors to the lack of completion rates. But I don't want to focus in on entirely on SDS on this and on the apprenticeship delivery. Because Withers set a challenge for everyone. We've all been challenged here, government in particular. And I've held my hands up and said, I don't think what we have done, I think his criticism is justified. I think we can do better. And I think we need that level of self-awareness right across the landscape. And I was struck by something that the committee may be interested in around construction, because construction is a remarkably important sector for this country and for its economy. And CITB tell me that there are circa 18,000 young people in Scotland every year go to college to do construction courses. And only 15% of those go into construction. Now, this example of some of the things that have arisen through the reform work, it challenges us to ask ourselves why that's the case, what lies behind it. Because we need, if people are going to do courses, they surely have to be courses that they are interested in, courses that deliver to their needs and to the needs of the economy, and ensure that we have the workforce that we need. Not, I was going to say for tomorrow, but we actually need it now. So I think we have to be honest with ourselves. These numbers show that we're not getting it right. And we've all of us got to say, well, what do we do to tackle that? Yes, to Mr Rennie's point, we've got immediate challenges, absolutely. But if we don't take this opportunity that Withers has presented us with, and this bill presents us with, recognising the concerns that have been articulated, what do we do then? We're saying we're not going to respond to where we're coming up short. We're going to let it slide. It's too difficult. These are challenging times. That's not where I am, convener. I think we really need to, yes, we need to address some of the immediate challenges, but we absolutely have got to look at this strategic view of that post-16 landscape and get to the point where young people in particular who are best suited to go to university are going to university. They might be doing graduate apprenticeships. Young people who should be going into apprenticeships, if that's the right thing for them, then the right apprenticeships for them. And that's what the overarching piece of reform is about.
Is this bill the starting point, or is this the bill it?
It is only the starting point. It is what it enables. I hope I've portrayed to the committee today. It sits as a key enabler, but in a much wider piece of work on reform, but huge piece of work on reform. And so, to be honest, I've made it more challenging because every time we've lifted a rock and we've found something underneath it.
Minister, I know how challenging you can make things.
Yeah. Every time we lifted a rock and we found something, we haven't put that rock back. We've wanted to take this opportunity to get this right. And I saw in evidence there was some talk about this is a 10-year project. In some regards, it is, convener. It will take 5-10 years to get all of this in place. But with the bill, for example, there are elements, provisions within the bill that we could enact early. And we would look to enact those early. Because this is, and if there are things we can do in the meantime, we have a piece of work underway, and I'll share this with the committee because it should be finalised in the next few weeks, or looking at where all of this comes together and to what time frame. Maybe gives you a better picture of what I'm describing today, so that we are very clear in the direction of travel here, where we will get to with this. But to your point, the bill is critical, but it's a small part. It's the starting point for all of this work to flourish.
Just for a bit of balance, and I understand the criticisms and concerns that were raised in the Withers report about apprenticeships and the landscape. What's your response to the OECD report that actually was quite positive about what we're doing here in Scotland, and actually other countries could learn from the way apprenticeships are delivered here in Scotland? Just for balance.
Yeah,
So
I did say, I think earlier, convener, that we've got strong foundations to build upon. And we do, and we should recognise that. And some of the very people who have established those strong foundations in the apprenticeship space will move across to SFC. And I've actually had direct conversations, thanks to Frank Mitchell, the chair, with them. And I set them two immediate challenges. The first one was to look at what would they do differently if they weren't working to the framework they currently work within. You know, if we let them run free, and it's a bit of an exaggeration, but you know what I'm getting at, what would they do differently? And the second one was around what are the impediments or perceived impediments to being able to deliver to that vision, the vision that they believe would be better. And we are awaiting that feedback from them on that. And I think some of what the OECD report suggested has featured in Withers. I mean, there are elements that we've taken on board. But I just think we can't sit back and say, well, OECD said we're doing well, we're doing better than England, that's good enough. I don't think it is. I don't think a 1 in 4 dropout rate is good enough. And I'm not apportioning blame to anybody in particular on that, but we should all aspire to better.
I don't want to take up too much more time, but in response to Pam Duncan-Glancy, you've not really told us what the new organisation would do, bringing this into SFC, that would change that. You've spoken a lot about discussions and, you know, a desire. But can you give us one tangible thing that the SFC will do that is currently not being done in SDS that would take that completion rate beyond 76%?
So some of that sits out with the apprenticeship delivery. As I said to you, getting the careers offering right will be critical to that. But all of the things I've identified today as issues that have been raised about how apprenticeships are currently delivered and the issues that arise from that, by moving it into a different organisation with that awareness and all of the work that's been done around that and all of the work that will be done to build on that, the opportunity arises to do this differently and better. That's what it provides. I was simply giving you a flavour of the type of things that we could do in this space to get it right.
But you can't tell us as the Minister in charge of this what should be done better, what should change to deliver that.
Sorry, I think I have, Convener, with respect. And here's the other thing. As we move forward, we charge the people who will deliver this with exploring the practicalities of making those changes, the pros and cons, other things that they will bring forward in their dialogue with wider stakeholders, because whilst we've done a lot of work up until now, we need a lot more conversation with the various sectors as to what better would look like.
But that could potentially be done by SDS answering your two questions about what they would be able to do if they were allowed free rein and to remove any impediments. That might change some of the issues that you've got.
I think the Chief Executive of SDS was clear that he didn't share the concerns that others have expressed and I've expressed today. And for example, I understand from having read the response to the committee in writing, SDS are not of a view that the managing agent model as it currently operates is problematic. I'm not sure I would concur with that.
Okay. Bill Kidd.
Thank you very much already, Minister and team, because I think you just about covered everything I was going to ask you, but I'm going to ask you anyway. And, so just on the point of, you say, let's face it, it's been mentioned a few times that Withers called for a colleges first approach. And that caused a bit of concern amongst some of the private training providers whom we've spoken to. But earlier there, you committed in your remarks to a mixed economy. It pretty much amounts to a curriculum transformation, because that doesn't exist in that format just now. You're going to be sort of expanding things dramatically from the way that they exist at the moment. So on that basis, as I was saying, witnesses have been talking about that graduate and foundation apprenticeship starts haven't been increasing in the manner that had been hoped for, and there's a significant demand for a growth in all types of Scottish apprenticeship. So how will your mixed economy and the reforms proposed in the bill better meet this demand for apprenticeships which exists across Scotland?
Well, just to correct you, if I may, the mixed economy does currently exist. What I'm committing to is continuing the mixed economy approach. Yes, it can be refined. Yes, we need to drive up standards, both in the private and public sector. There's no doubt about that. There are issues in some instances, and I stress some instances, that I hear from employers about the experience they have of training provided in some of their colleges not being up to what they're looking for. There are issues around the nature of some of the qualifications and the inflexibility of qualifications, the lack of agility in the system to deliver change that employers and the economy require. That's something else, another work stream that's underway, Mr. Kidd. But to your point about, I think you were driving at more graduate apprenticeships, etc. It's also about quality and the nature of those apprenticeships. Sometimes young people will quit apprenticeships because it's not for them and it's not, of a calibre that they were hoping for. We're looking very closely at how they align also with the needs of the economy. And that's not simply to meet the asks of employers, but it's to try and better guarantee a continuing well-paid employment for these individuals at the conclusion of their apprenticeships. I don't know if that's answered your question. I think on the graduate apprenticeship front, which Pam Duncan-Glancy raised as well, I genuinely have asked the experts in this space to look at what better would look like. How do we broaden it out? Because there are examples, and this perhaps strays into the widening access area convener, where we have young people identified as qualifying under the widening access agenda to go to university. And they tell the university, we'd love to, but we can't afford to. Because of the challenges with our family circumstances, we need to go out and get a job. The graduate apprenticeship model can help in that space. And that's one of the things. It's not the only driver for what we're doing. I think there's enormous potential for graduate apprenticeships. And by bringing all of this together and looking at apprenticeships in the round, I think we have an opportunity that we don't currently have. So, for example, foundation apprenticeships are funded currently by 2 different organisations. They'll be funded by one, whatever form that takes. There's an opportunity here to really look at what it is we offer currently, and as I keep saying, how we make it better. But we make it better by listening to the people who've engaged with it, frankly, the experts in the field. I'm not going to sit here and tell the committee I know exactly what we need to do to improve graduate apprentices. I don't work at the coalface of that every day, but I am entrusting the people who do that to come back and support us to deliver better.
Thank you. And can I just add to that? Thank you. Just on the back of that then, in particular, in your last remarks there about those who actually do work at the coalface and actually engage with apprentices and potential apprentices. We have been told about some people who go along to start an apprenticeship, etc., and then after a relatively short period of time they find out it doesn't suit them and it's not the kind of thing that they thought it was going to be in the first place. And how can that be addressed so that people aren't wasting their time and the colleges and private individuals?
It's a very good question, and this is what I mean about the read across to other elements of the reform agenda, because equipping our young people to make the right decisions for them is hugely important. And what I said earlier, that we all have been challenged by withers. The challenge that I've been setting employers is we need, in my opinion, a careers offering going forward, which includes meaningful work experience opportunities for individuals who may see something that they wanted to do. They need to test themselves in that environment. Now, to be fair, there are very good examples of that. If you look at the foundation apprenticeship model in Aberdeenshire, it kind of does that. And there are pockets of good practice across the country which deliver this. But it's just as important that if a young person gets that opportunity, it may well be that they find they don't want to do that. That heads a problem off at the pass. So my challenge to employers has been, you will need to do this going forward in the coming years. And overwhelmingly the answer is yes, we know that, because it's in no one's interest. They're all competing with each other for the same workforce, and they have to get the right people. So there is buy-in to that approach, and that's what I meant about, apprenticeship dropout isn't always necessarily linked to the training. It can sometimes be other factors that are at play.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jackie Dunbar.
Thank you. Good morning, Minister. If I can go back on to the foundation apprenticeships, the committee's heard concerns that the bill's proposed definition of apprenticeships could potentially exclude foundation apprenticeships. I'd be keen to hear your view about what you think the future of them will be, the future of foundation apprenticeships, that is.
So I'm going to ask Andrew to deal with the bill as it's drafted, and then I'll answer the very specific points of your question.
Thank you. Yes. So the bill, the drafting of the bill doesn't talk about modern apprentices, graduate apprentices, or foundation apprentices. The bill defines work-based learning, and that is the term that would cover a lot of what are currently foundation apprentices. And the bill gives quite broad powers for the SFC to deliver work-based learning, and it could be in a very similar model to as now, or it could be different. And it's worth saying that, of course, that's the word used in the bill. Things can be branded or labelled differently as people see fit. When we engaged with the SARB Short Life Working Group on apprenticeship definition in the autumn, as we were preparing the bill, the steer we got from them was that it wasn't helpful to embed the names of apprenticeships in the bill, and that actually a significant number of employers didn't like the term foundation apprenticeships, because although there's a lot of worthwhile work and experience that happens in those settings, it's not a true apprenticeship, as in the person isn't in paid employment.
So is that a second class or apprenticeship then? Is that what you're saying?
No, it's just different. It's just different. I think the sense we got from the working group was that it was confusing for people, because if in layman's terms, when you're talking about an apprenticeship, you imagine a person in paid employment. So foundation apprenticeship is a slightly different thing to a modern apprentice or a graduate apprentice. That's not to say that it's not a valuable experience, but it's not an apprenticeship as the layperson would understand it.
So it's an apprenticeship, but not an apprenticeship.
Well, this was the sense we got from the working group, Minister.
So, to go into the specifics of your point, and this maybe clarifies things. If you take foundation apprenticeships, the Aberdeenshire model, there's some interesting things arise from that. So perhaps, Mr. Barr, you're thinking that this will be a pathway from foundation apprenticeship directly into modern apprenticeships. And there is a proportion of young people who follow that path. It's helpful for employers to identify the right fit for their business. But interestingly about the Aberdeenshire model, first of all, it's driving up academic performance. What's happening is young people are going into that work experience setting, realising that a subject at school, usually maths, that they don't particularly enjoy, is going to be essential in order to pursue the career they've now decided they really want to pursue. And therefore, the head teachers are anecdotally reporting an uptick in academic performance. We're seeing a sizable number of foundation apprentices going to university. So it isn't, whilst there is a degree of read across, it isn't necessarily the case that someone who does a foundation apprenticeship goes into a modern apprenticeship. And the beauty of the Aberdeenshire system is it's so wide-ranging. It offers so many opportunities for young people across a range of career choices. The other thing about Aberdeenshire is that the council part funds that. Yes, there's a large contribution from SDS, but they also, and it's a diminishing, they have been reducing their funding, but there has been a contribution. And funnily enough, I'm quite drawn to that, because here's the thing. This Parliament's budget already funds local authorities to educate these young people. And I think there is something in that space around some degree of co-funding if we maintain or expand the foundation apprenticeship model. That said, I said earlier that we've been looking very closely at the vocational offering that's also available in the later stages of school education, because I think we need to look at both of them if we're going to get the system right. And I should also add that I had a really useful session with the School Leaders Forum, Now, they are the innovative, forward-thinking leaders of our schools. They have some different views on what foundation apprenticeships, or whatever they were to be called, would look like going forward, how we could best introduce those. So it is a work in progress around that. I'm not going to sit and say we're going to do X, Y or Z, but I hope that's a further illustration of the depth of thinking that's gone in here to getting this right.
So just to go back, do you see a future of foundation apprenticeships moving forward, and do you see them being equal, have equal importance as the modern apprenticeship or the graduate apprenticeship? Because every child, as you say, every bairn's different. So moving forward, where do you see the future?
As Andrew said, in a way, you're not comparing like for like because it's not a paid placement. What I absolutely see is a role for that type of learning within the later stages of school. So if the Aberdeenshire model essentially treats a foundation apprenticeship like another higher, it's got that status in the curriculum. I referred earlier to the model in Lanarkshire where they're delivering HNCs in 6 years. It's another possibility. We are open to exploring all of this as part of that wide-ranging look at the post-16 landscape, of which the bill that we're discussing today is an enabling part.
Okay, I'll leave that for just now.
Thank you. Joe Fitzpatrick.
Minister, last week we had two panels. One of the panels was with representatives of the staff side, the trade unions. And obviously there's a number of trade unions involved in this area. And it's quite unusual in those circumstances for the unions to speak with one voice. But the staff representatives last week definitely did speak with one voice, and they all expressed concern and complaints about the lack of engagement as they saw it about the reform. I wonder if you could just tell us what engagement there has been and how you intend to fix that, because right now it sounds like there's a real loss of morale within the organisations because they don't feel included, they don't feel consulted, and they feel that this is being done to them.
So I was disappointed to hear that and concerned. So if I take you through the engagement there's been, I sat down myself with the trade union reps at the very start of the process and committed us collectively to ongoing engagement. And there has been that, and I'll come to that in a moment. But I've also directly engaged in a series of meetings and Q&As with the staff in all of the agencies affected. So I've met with SDS and the staff involved in careers, apprenticeship, skills planning and employer engagement. I've met with the SQA, I think, twice, and SAS staff twice. I think I've met with the SFC team once. I also understand there have been, in the last 9 months, 3 meetings between my officials and the trade unions as we have progressed things. Now, the last of those meetings was in January. There have been 2 reasons, and I want to be absolutely honest with the committee, why there's been nothing since January. The first one is that the focus has been on the bill. There hasn't been a cause to consult with them on anything new because the bill was progressing. And the second one was we've had a staff absence issue within our team. We had someone directly allocated to engage with the trade unions. So a combination of those 2 things is the reason for that. I'm actually meeting the STUC tomorrow as part of my ongoing engagement. So I'll discuss this with them. But we have reached out to the trade union reps, offered a meeting in June. We're looking for a date that will work for them. And if it's at all possible, I'll attend the meeting as well to address some of their concerns. So I hope that provides an answer.
I think that's helpful, because I guess for a number of staff, until the bill got to this committee, this might have seemed pretty distant. And then all of a sudden, it's in the committee, it's in the public domain, and this is something that all of a sudden is real. And so all of a sudden the staff want to engage, they want to speak out, they want to understand how it's going to impact on them. And I guess one of the areas where there's particular concern about how it's going to impact, Kavina touched on it earlier, would be the staff in SDS who think that they might be within scope to move. And that lack of certainty, which Andrew kind of talked about, and there's processes to be gone through. You know, there's a real impact on their morale. I thought it was quite a strange session last week. We had the trade union rep from SDS basically defending the current system, opposing changes which I think potentially, from everything we've been hearing, would mean better conditions, pay and conditions, pensions for their membership if they moved across to, but really against it. And I guess that must be because they're really, really concerned about what this means for them because of the lack of information. So I guess hearing a bit about how we're going to make sure that that process, which Andrew talked about, that needs to happen, how we make sure that the staff have as much real information as possible, because if we don't have real information coming from government, then it will be filled with a void of rumours, and that's...
I absolutely recognise that observation, because I think when there's a vacuum, it is filled with rumour and misinformation. There's no doubt about that. And you're right, it is unsettling for people if they are looking at significant change in their working environment and they're not entirely understanding what that would look like. Taking that point on board, and recognising that the committee is obviously doing its work on the Stage 1 report, I'll certainly undertake personally to reflect on how we can better engage with that particular cohort of staff. As I say, I would hope that from what you've heard me outline, I've done a fair bit of staff engagement. I get how important this is, but I think it's a fair point, Mr Fitzpatrick, that particularly at this stage, when it becomes that bit more real, people want as many answers as they can have. So we'll take that away and reflect on it and factor that into the discussions hopefully taking place next month.
Thanks very much.
Did that invite go out before or after last week's evidence session?
It was after last week's evidence session. To be honest, Convener, I wasn't aware, if I'm absolutely candid with you, that there had been any drop-off in the engagement. I was quite surprised to hear that. There is an explanation, as I've provided, but it was on the back of that evidence, and we've reacted to that.
I think that is encouraging, because I think across the committee we were quite concerned about that, and there was some indication that a commitment had been made by you or your officials back on the 9th of December 2024 to keep up this engagement with unions. And I understand if there is staff absences, but you know, the government is a large organisation and normally people would pick up that slack. So why was that not maintained by other members in your team to get to the extent that we have 5 unions coming to us, as Mr Fitzpatrick says, speaking with one voice about their concerns about the lack of engagement with you and your officials?
So I guess there's been a disconnect between expectation of what that would look like in reality and what they were taking it to be. And I would contend that when there have been developments in this process, there has been that engagement directly with the trade unions. But I also draw the distinction between that and the direct engagement I've had with the staff. I've gone in front of the staff, I've updated them on where we are, and I've answered as openly as I can any and all questions they've had. So I think a combination...
Just on that, though, one of the points put to us in evidence last week was these meetings are useful, but sometimes staff think when a minister's in front of them, they can't ask the real challenging questions, which is why they leave it to their unions in these specific meetings between the unions and yourself and your officials. Would you take that on board?
That may be the case for some people, but if I say to you that some of the questions I've had in these meetings would not suggest that was the case, which is good. Yeah. But what I've also done, if this is helpful, Convener, I've tried to do as many of these meetings without senior management in the room, in case that they felt impeded them in raising any point. So we've done as much as we thought we could and should have done, but I absolutely take the criticism on board, and I will inform our approach going forward.
Thank you. Pam Duncan-Glancy.
Thank you, Convener. And just on that engagement that the Minister says he's had, Unite, from the staff from the SFC, said that staff were told what will happen without being part of the conversation. PCS said that this is a reform programme happening to staff, not with them. Unison said the bill has placed our members in a state of limbo. And finally, the PCS said the bill is not the solution to the current state of skills delivery in Scotland. So does the Minister accept that there's been a failure to take staff with the government on this journey, and that could have resulted in some of the reasons why the committee has heard that the problems that exist won't necessarily be resolved by this bill?
So I think we've covered the issue, the point about what the bill does and doesn't do. I have at all times in my engagement with the staff in all of the affected agencies made the point to them that I want to hear their thoughts, and I have heard directly from them, their thoughts on how this works currently, what could be done differently. Now, it has been a mixed bag of responses, and some people have just expressed concern. I accept that. But overwhelmingly, it has been constructive from the point of view of saying, well, you know what, we could have done this, or you might want to look at that example. I'll give an example of that, if I may. One of the things that exercises me is that I'm not sure that the current apprenticeship offering entirely captures, or anywhere near captures, the needs of SMEs, which are the lifeblood of this country. Now, there are two conflicting stats, and forgive me if I get these round the wrong way, but I think SFC say that, SDS rather say, that 92% of their apprenticeships are with SMEs, but the Federation of Small Businesses says something like 83% of their members have never had an apprentice. And that stat troubles me. There's a disconnect there. And one of the issues for small businesses, and this was brought home in a series of pilots, I think it was in 2015, is the hassle for small businesses, so the grief, as they would see it, around HR, etc., and training. And it all becomes too much for them to take on apprentices, when actually for succession planning their business needs that. And actually, it was a staff member who had come to us and suggested a possible solution to that, which we are looking at. So I absolutely accept that there will be concerns, as have been expressed to the committee. I've been open with your convener about what we'll do in response to that. But I think I have been as open as I possibly can be. And if I say to you, I've had staff members at a session who then met me at something else and said, I didn't feel I could raise this on the day, but I just wanted to say. And all of that's been taken on board.
Okay.
John Mason.
Thanks very much, convener. Thank you. Thanks, convener. The convener's already raised a number of issues in the financial area, and that's kind of where I want to go as well. On the Parliament's website, it says that a financial memorandum should set out best estimates of the costs, savings and changes to revenues arising from a bill. But as I understand it from Mr Mott, we do not have an estimate of the pension costs here. So does that mean you're failing to meet what is normally expected from a financial memorandum?
Would that we had information of the type the convener asked for at this stage? Yes, I would absolutely want that to be the case. But I think that sometimes in the progression of legislation, there are some challenges that arise, and this is one. Can I say, in all honesty, Mr Mason, I share your frustration, because I, from the outset, felt there was an absolute need to nail down these numbers, and it isn't for a lack of desire to do this. As Mr Mott has outlined, there are a number of challenges we have to work through in order to get that accurate number. But I gave a commitment to the convener, and Mr Mott will be living up to that commitment, that we will bring this back ASAP, and that my intention would be to bring that back to the committee before the stage 1 debate, so that can form part of the debate.
Yeah, because for myself personally, and I take your previous argument that if it was, say, 27 million or 30 million or thereabouts as a one-off cost, it would be a one-off cost, and, you know, we could look at that spread over the years. But the other argument is that, you know, for £27 million just to kind of rearrange the furniture is quite a lot of money. And so it would be a factor in my deciding whether I'm supporting the bill at stage 1 or not, I have to say, because I opposed Liz Smith's bill on basically the same amount of money, 30 million. So, fair enough. To go into some of the detail of that, then the largest part seems to be pension. Now, my understanding is that TUPE protects staff transferring to another organisation so that they don't lose out. But the argument here seems to be that the staff moving should get a much better pension. Now, I don't think TUPE insists on them having a much better pension. I think it insists on them not losing out. And in fact, the pension area in TUPE is a bit grey, I think, anyway. So, I mean, has the government really gone through all of this, all the options? Does it have to be TUPE? Does it have to be the same pension fund that they're moving into?
bring Alison in a moment to answer that specific point, but I want to go back to your point about £27 million to rearrange the furniture. First of all, we don't believe it will be in that range, but we'll see what that looks like. This is not, absolutely not, about rearranging the furniture. What would be the point if that's all we were doing? I hope I've outlined today very clearly to the committee the kind of changes that are required to be made and will be made by this. So I don't agree with you on the point about rearranging the furniture, Mr Mason. This is an opportunity, once and for all, to knock this into the kind of shape that the economy and our young people needs, and we've got to take that opportunity. But I'll bring Alison in on the point you raised.
Sure. Yes, thanks. That's the work that's being done right now to look at what is really structural reorganisation, and it's not for the government to take a view necessarily if 2P applies or not. Those are legally distinct bodies and they will have to take their own views as well, but it's that work that's happening right now that Andrew's been talking about to identify what is the appropriate thing, and of course to comply with any legal requirements that sit beside that. But it's essentially in its sort of development stages, which really only properly could commence once the bill was introduced.
Although I think it does suggest that the government might put a cap on the one-off cost or the transfer cost. So that suggests the government would be involved in all of this?
That's not really for me to say, I think. That would be for Andrew.
So when we published the financial memorandum, we put the best information we had at the time. There are obviously, as Alison's indicating, quite a lot of complexities to work through in terms of staff transfer, terms and conditions, who's responsible, what exactly those terms and conditions are. So when we produced this in January, February, that was our best information. And as the Minister has said, you know, we're going to go through a process of getting more specific, so we will have better data. I just want to make a point, if I may, though, about the purpose of the bill, because there's a funding diagram that the Scottish Government published, I think, with the purpose and principles in 2023, and it's a horrific wiring. It looks like a wiring diagram for circuit board of all the funding flows for provision funding, This bill supports the simplification of the funding body landscape. And at the moment, the SFC has statutory powers to provide funding for colleges and universities. SDS funds apprenticeships administratively. It's not a body in statute. If you want to simplify the funding body landscape, which, as the Minister set out, is key to enabling all the sort of apprenticeship development, all the good work that you can then do, you have to have legislation, because at the moment some of it's in statute and some of it isn't. When we were developing our options, 3 of which went to public consultation in last summer, there was a lot of work to look at all the possible ways you could try and simplify this landscape, and a lot of options were ruled out for various reasons, either not very good value or very impractical, and the 3 viable options were consulted on. And it's important to see this as kind of enabling. So in a way that the bill is agnostic on all the way you could take forward apprenticeship reform and all the possibilities you could sort of unlock. But it's an essential enabling, because unless you do that sort of simplification of that horrific wiring...
And I mean, I think the Finance Committee, certainly, I'm not here to speak for the Finance Committee, Mr Gray and myself are on both committees, but we absolutely support the simplification of the landscape as part of our public reform work, and we do not want to see more public bodies. So if we're simplifying things, absolutely, I'm on board. I will totally support you in that. But we still have to look at the costs.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm doing. The Finance Committee took evidence but didn't have time to really go into any detail with witnesses. So that's why I'm concerned about that. Just on this pensions point then, can I ask, is one of the options you're looking at that SFC would continue with 2 different pension schemes, or are you assuming that it will go ahead with the better pension scheme for everybody?
It's a possibility. I mean, I think it's not for us at this stage to say what the future sort of terms and conditions will look like. We need to do this piece of work. We need to get more accurate costings, and we'll come back to committee with them. I think the other thing that is worth saying is it's not just a cost without any benefits. So there's financial benefits and non-financial benefits. We're doing this piece of legislation for the learner first and foremost, and for employers. So there are better outcomes for learners and employers through the work that may be quite hard to cost. But there are also potentially financial benefits that are unlocked. If you're going back to that diagram with the horrific sort of chains of flow, one of the things that happens at the moment is that funding can go from organisation to A to B to C to D before it goes to frontline delivery. And even if those organisations are not making a profit, they certainly have overheads. And so we believe there's plenty of opportunity to get them, if you like, the money to frontline delivery faster, so that you don't have situations where a managing agent makes an arrangement with a college who makes an arrangement with a training provider, and then at the end of it there's a learner. Yes. So that there should be some financial benefits as well.
Yes, and again, I'm on board for some of these things. But I mean, every witness we have at the Finance Committee will tell us that if we spend £1 now, we're going to again save £10 in 10 years' time. And that's all very well, but we have to find the pound today. Yes. And you were asking us to find maybe £30 million. And you did say it's not for us at this stage. Well, I have to disagree with that. This is meant to be the best estimate in the financial memorandum. And you're saying it's not for you to know at this stage. I think some of that preparatory work, like will there be 2 schemes in SFC or 1 scheme? I mean, we know that some of the staff will definitely transfer if this goes ahead. I accept that some we don't know about. So I do think more work could have been done before we got to this stage. But if I can move on to some other points. The question of financial sustainability was mentioned earlier on, and the SFC being able or not able to, for example, require data. And it was suggested that maybe in future SFC would be able to require data. I mean, can you explain to us why you think SFC didn't pick up the Dundee University problems, and maybe other universities as well? Is it because they didn't have the powers, or the powers they had they weren't using?
So these are autonomous institutions, and the convener reminded us earlier about ONS classification. So there is a relationship between the SFC and the university. There's a relationship between the government and the SFC. I just want to get that on the record. The SFC is only able to act based upon the information that it has at its disposal. Now, the institutions will tell you that they provide quite a lot of information, and I think to an extent they do. And I want to be very careful here, Mr Mason, not to prejudge the Pamela Gillis inquiry, right? So bear with me on that. If it emerges from that and any other work, well, the committee's recommendations, that it were deemed to be more that the SFC might have done, they might have been more cited, then of course we'll look at that. I know that they're looking closely at, you know, from their own point of view, what more they could have done. But this is only as good as the information, or the process is only as good as the information that's provided. And I am keen to explore if there could be more done to ensure that the oversight, bearing in mind that in many of these institutions, the public financial contribution to them is quite small compared to their overall activity, but public money needs to be protected. So if there's any more that could have been done, then we will take that on board and respond to it. If there are any suggestions about what could be done differently going forward, if there's changes in governance, as I've said earlier, then we'll absolutely take that on board as well.
I mean, I take the points you make. I mean, I for one, again, would be open to, if the SFC need more powers, well, let's put them in now and give them. I take your point that a university especially has a lot of income that doesn't come from the public purse. On the other hand, I think if a university gets into difficulty, they are expecting the public purse to bail them out. So there is quite a big risk in there. But I mean, I fully accept we have to get the report in due course.
Can I just pick up on that point from the convener? On the point of sustainability, there is a narrative developed, which is that and I fully accept the financial challenges universities have got, and for a wide range of reasons. There is a bit of a narrative that says that financial sustainability is only arrived at by more public money being provided. But there are also some custom and practice issues on how institutions operate that they themselves need to look at. And I don't say that in any way to deflect. I just offer this observation. So there is a kind of operating model in certainly some of our universities where when a new market, a new source of income is identified, they recruit quite heavily in order to deal with that. And then if that market or that source of income is diminished for whatever reason, then the same number of people are faced with losing their jobs. And we've seen that in a number of universities where there have been significant job losses. Some of this is down to how they operate. So there's, of course, we need to look at the financing of our universities collectively, UK government, Scottish government, all of those things I take on board. But there is also a piece of work for the universities to do themselves about the way in which they go about their business, frankly. And I think they know that.
Yes, and I mean, we would expect internal and external audit to be involved in that for the universities. So I'll be very interested to hear what this report kind of comes out with. Now, obviously, with financial sustainability, we're mainly thinking about universities and colleges. What about other training providers? I mean, is there any need to be overseeing them and looking at their financial sustainability, like the more private sector? Or can we just rely on the private sector to look after that aspect?
So it's a very pertinent question, because we have in recent times seen a couple of high-profile training providers close with significant consequences for the individuals who've been engaged with them. I certainly know that SAS, and I'll be pulled up by officials about the exact terminology, because there is an issue about some of the terminology that's been used in evidence to the committee, which we'll pick up in a moment, about training providers. I certainly know that SAS are doing a piece of work around the oversight of the training provision. I don't mean private training providers as in the people who are delivering on the apprenticeship front, but in that training provision that is funded in the kind of college, university space. Colleagues will give you the right terminology. I do think it is reasonable to expect that reasonable oversight is there, but for reasons that the team will explain, I think this maybe goes to John Vincent's ask of the committee. Is that where you're going, Mr.
I think
Mason?
it was he who raised it.
Yeah, I want the team to come in on that, because there are very technical reasons around the answer to that.
I mean, I don't want to get into too much detail, but just an overall feel of it. Thanks.
So if we're talking about training providers that provide training for apprenticeships, etc., the bill allows the SFC to fund training providers, and they of a great range. So they could be a natural person or a legal person. So like it could be me delivering training to 10 apprentices, or it could be some big organisation. So that's a massive range, and it's appropriate because the college sector can deliver lots of excellent training, but they might need there's a very particular bit of expertise in some area, and that might be a very small training provider that does that. So in terms of oversight, it wouldn't be appropriate to apply the same sort of oversight regime as is applied to fundable bodies as to that great range of training providers. In practice, the SFC will make arrangements with those providers, and those arrangements, they can set out the terms and conditions. And there's ways of protecting public money when you make, as with any, if you're buying a car, whatever, thinking about paying, you pay for services delivered. So I mean, broadly, you would have more confidence in a bigger organisation than a smaller one. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that there isn't a one-size-fits-all. Yeah. So if an arrangement's made with a very small organisation, the terms and conditions need to be appropriate, so that it's not too onerous. We don't want to exclude providers from the arrangement by imposing very onerous sort of obligations on all of them. I suppose I'm just looking for some reassurance that a small provider getting into trouble is not going to hugely disadvantage the learners.
Well, numerically it wouldn't. No. But I do have to say, Mr Mason, my experience, and I've done a lot of engagement, some of the best training provision I've seen has come from very small private training providers, some excellent apprenticeship delivery, real high-end stuff. That's what I mean about the need for a mixed economy.
Yes. Okay, right, happy to leave it at that. Thanks, Convener.
Just while we're on some of the financial aspects of this, can you tell us the amount raised by the apprenticeship levy in Scotland every year, in the last couple of years?
No, because it isn't shared with us.
Okay. So why not?
So the UK government a number of years ago, it did up till that point.
Yeah.
And then it took an approach that said we're just going to include a relevant amount in the block grant. So I can't honestly sit and tell you what that is. That's the situation we're in. It's the way in which it's operated at UK level. Now, there are some plans to change the English system. We await the detail of that. It may be that something greater clarity emerges from that, Convener. But as things stand, and it's been the case for a number of years, that information is not shared with us.
So, because it came, the Economy and Fair Work Committee have written to you, and that was one of their questions, for the Scottish Government to clarify the amount raised by the apprenticeship levy in Scotland and provide a breakdown of how it is allocated in Scotland. Can you answer none of that question to the committee because of these circumstances?
Well, from your starting point, no. I can, and I think the committee has seen the information about the amount of money that is spent on apprenticeships, notwithstanding the additional staff costs that go with that. But no, we don't have that basis. I'd quite like to see that number.
Okay, thank you. Jackie Dunbar.
Thank you. During the evidence sessions that we've been having, concerns have been raised about the potential changes that are going to be made to the delivery of future education student support, although SAS and SFC have stated that colleges are going to retain that role in distribution of their support. What assurances can you give on providing on the ongoing role that colleges are going to have in that regard? So
are you getting at the staff on the ground operating in the colleges? Is that what you're getting at? The existing approach that's utilised, and essentially is this a lift and shift of that model? Well, unlike the apprenticeship, then that is what is intended. We will retain that approach. Certainly in the short to medium term, that's the plan.
Okay.
Thank you. Miles Briggs.
Convener, good morning, Minister. Good morning to your officials as well. I wanted to ask a few questions in relation to governance, and we've touched upon some of this already in terms of what will be transferred to SFC in the bill, and the committee has heard a number of concerns in regards to the council membership and how that will reflect.
What membership?
The membership of the council.
Okay.
In relation to, specifically in relation to the role of SAB as well. And so we've heard from a number of witnesses wanting to know what that will look like, but also the breadth of that landscape which will be needed, including apprenticeships, research, colleges and universities. So what extent, Minister, do you believe the bill does this? And what further changes, given the evidence we've taken on this, have you...
So I think we currently have one vacancy on the council. We've got 4 coming up. As you say, the council's the board for the understanding of the members because of different terminology. So essentially there will be 5 appointments to be made and a new chair. We've been in dialogue with the SFC already about the range of skills that it would be advantageous to have at its disposal. Now, as you're aware, the bill seeks to remove a provision for existing serving sectoral people in the college and university sector. And I'm more than happy to defend that. I think there are some issues that arise there where people having to recuse themselves from the decision-making process because of a conflict of interest. We're in a very fortunate position, without wanting to set hairs running, that we have, through the retirement process, a number of very experienced and highly talented former principals of universities and colleges out there. So I don't think there'll be any lack of that kind of valuable input to the future work of the board of SFC. But it goes without saying that if they take on additional responsibilities, the board structure needs to reflect that breadth of knowledge and understanding. And I think that would take the form, and clearly this is to be worked through, would take the form of, I'd like to see some employer representation on the board. Actually, I think there's an argument for something in the training space as well, but that's for another day, perhaps. There's certainly, I think I saw a suggestion in some of the evidence that you took around financial sustainability, some expertise in that. I mean, there's a whole range of need and opportunity there to support what will be essentially a new organisation, hopefully with a new dynamism, a new purpose, with that expertise brought onto the committee, the Apprenticeship Advisory Committee. But I absolutely concur with you about the make-up of the board, and I'd be very interested if the committee has any thoughts in its report on what that might look like.
Thank you for that. And, you know, the Withers report did acknowledge what has been an effective means to engage with industry. And so I think there were quite significant concerns on what could be lost in translation in the bill. So in terms of transition arrangements...
This is in relation to SAB,
yeah.
Yes.
What transition arrangements do you then foresee that this will continue until SFC have all this in place?
I think I'm right in saying that there's been conversations with SAB around continuing the current offering through till we get into that full transition process. Yeah. There are two committees that exist within SAB currently, which would essentially form part of the transition because they offer an expertise. Thank you, Andrew. They offer an expertise. That's the Standard and Frameworks Group and the Apprenticeship Approvals Group, which will help. And it may well be that that membership morphs into membership of the committee. But I think it's important that we take this opportunity to expand, I don't just mean numerically, but to expand the breadth of employer voice that's available to advise. I talked earlier about the SMEs as an example of that. We need to do more in that space. So what is it we need to do more of in order to improve that situation? So that for the transition period, you will have, right up to the transition, you've got SAB, and then you've got these two committees, and with the formation of the new overarching group to make that transition work.
Okay, thanks for that. And I think people are looking for those reassurances that this isn't just going to be window dressing, that it will actually be fundamentally...
I said to you earlier, to the committee earlier, Mr Briggs, I want to enhance employer engagement here. There's been some good stuff done, I don't deny that, but there is an opportunity here as we do things differently and better to enhance the employer voice in all of this.
Yeah. There was a couple of things which I've picked up during our evidence sessions which aren't currently in the bill, specifically aligning to skill shortages, and wondered if that's something the government have looked at, and then also in terms of target setting, because it has been raised with us, there's no minimum level guarantees as part of the bill, looking, for example, around rights for apprentices and also employers. So I think there's still quite a lot potentially for stage 2 amendments around this, and just wondered where government have been listening and picked up on some of this already as well.
So if I didn't convey this well enough, my apologies. We're doing an extensive piece of work, and have been for several months, across government and with stakeholder groups around skill shortages. And there is a distinction, as you know, between skill shortages and workforce shortages. We can't magic up people, but we can ensure that people with the right skills are available. And we've been looking at drilling down into some of the assertions. So if I say to you, you will have heard this number, we are short of 3,000 welders. My question then becomes, what kind of welders and where? If we're short of engineers, the same sort of question. And we need that level of intelligence to help shape the future. And it's not just the apprenticeship offering, it's about our whole approach to tackling some of these issues. So going forward, armed with that information, which is developing, with some really detailed work from particular sectors. It's proving really helpful and is actually driving some immediate response now through our economy colleagues. Skills and economy directorates are working very closely together at the moment on things out with this bill to deal with some of the short-term problems. But in the longer term, of course, there are economic priorities. And that will have the opportunity through the new arrangement to feed that in to our planning. So, for example, critical sectors such as childcare. You know, if we don't have enough childcare in the country, we're not accessing the entire workforce. Planning, construction, all of the obvious things that we would all come up with. But then there are other elements here that we need to protect, which are things that are critical to the economy. They're not huge numbers. An area you've taken particular interest in, I know, is stonemasonry. Now, there's an example. We will always need stonemasons. How do we ensure that the appropriate access to stonemasonry apprenticeships is there for the economy and for our young people? Going back to the careers piece, encouraging people into these pathways. And that's where, on the apprenticeship model, we need to ensure that the funding that's available for some of these disciplines reflects the cost. Because one of the reasons we've seen stonemasonry, as an example, fall away, as you know, is because of the cost base that has to be incurred by whoever's providing the training. So we need a model that takes account of these elements of the costs as well. And that's another one of the pieces of work that will form what we do going forward.
Yeah. Just finally, if I've got time, and we've had a couple of conversations around this, Minister, in relation to private sector investment in the college sector. And I think one of the interesting things is looking where different colleges have done different things, I think Ayrshire especially, to be able to factor in some of that private investment. And to go back to your previous point, equipment is often what is cited. Heat source pump fitting here in Edinburgh is directly linked with the manufacturer. So people are leaving college able to fit a piece of equipment they have worked on. So I just wondered, there's very little in the bill in terms of opportunities to align more private sector investment to meet those skill shortages, but also to fund what is going to be needed as well for our college sector particularly.
So I absolutely concur with the point you're making. I don't think that's for the bill. I don't really see that fits into what the bill sets out to do in this space. But it refers to some parallel work that we're doing with the colleges. So there's a lot of work in the curriculum transformation space. And one of the things that we have recognised, brought to us by some of the college chairs, is that there are colleges who see an opportunity to get more commercial income. But they don't have the knowledge, the resource in the college to go out there and secure that. So that's something we're looking at in a parallel piece of work about what we can do to support that. There is an accompanying piece to that, however, which is that some of the colleges have raised with me impediments, restrictions in the qualifications that are available to them that prevent them fully utilising the kit that they've got, particularly in the green skills space. So I've undertaken to take that away and look at, again, it's this impediments thing. What gets in the way of maximising the opportunity for them there? I don't think that sits with this bill, but I'm more than happy to continue this discussion with Mr Briggs.
Thanks. Ross Greer. Thank you, Convener. Minister, you'll be aware that a number of witnesses, the trade union representatives, had suggested that the bill's an opportunity to increase transparency and perhaps set some stronger rules around senior staff salaries at institutions. You know that's a position that I have a lot of sympathy for. I, in particular, can't understand why college principals are exempt from the salary rules that apply to every other chief executive equivalent in the public sector. But interested in your response to what the unions have put forward in that regard, particularly given the point that Mary Senior made, that it does make it harder to argue for public money to go to these institutions when you have senior members of staff at the institutions. I think there are far in excess of 100 members of senior staff at universities in particular who earn far in excess of what the First Minister does. In some cases, 4 times what the First Minister does.
I'm at a slight disadvantage. I haven't seen all of that evidence. I'm not sure if you're aware as a committee, but there is some considerable delay in the official report being published for all of the committees, and it has been quite unhelpful. So I haven't seen the exact specifics of that, but I kind of figured you were going to raise this question. I understand the argument that is made around the principle of remuneration for senior staff within, particularly in the university sector, because I think that's been the biggest challenge when we're talking about UCU. It is very difficult to legislate to address that. And it is a fact that some of our larger institutions are competing for the very brightest and the best to run what are multi-million-pound businesses, and they have to compete there salary-wise. However, I absolutely recognise the concern that the trade unions have raised and others have raised about remuneration packages, increases that have been offered. I referred earlier to a meeting I had with the university's chairs a couple of months ago. It would be wrong of me to go into too much detail, but I took the opportunity to point out to them how that was viewed out there, how it looked. You're absolutely right about wanting more public money at a time where large remuneration increases were being offered, particularly to principals, but also others. I read some of these stories in the media, and I've made clear to them an expectation that they should exercise restraint and self-awareness going forward. That's probably as much as I can do currently, but I do think we need to see that at play.
I understand up to a point you're saying. The reality is, where an institution receives significant amounts of public funding, conditions can be attached to that public funding. And I understand the distinction between universities and colleges. Universities are independent institutions competing in a more globalised market. I don't accept that that makes the principal of Edinburgh University's recent salary increase acceptable, though. But on colleges, and I know we've discussed this before, but is it still the government's position that college principals should not be subject to the chief executive pay framework that applies to all other equivalent roles across the public sector other than publicly owned companies, Scottish Water and Scottish Rail Holdings?
I think the issue is more complicated than simply saying, why not just do that? I'm happy to have further conversations with Mr Greer about this. And of course, he's entitled to bring amendments to this bill if it's deemed to be in scope. That would be a matter for him. I simply, it sounds like I'm kind of...
have already been requested.
Apologies, I didn't catch that.
Drafting instructions have already been requested on this matter.
There's a shock. Yeah. And we will interrogate that through the committee process, presuming the committee recommends progression of the bill. I think these are important issues to debate. I think there needs to be greater self-awareness out there that at a time where public finances are constrained, that there is, as I say, some degree of self-restraint at very least exercised here. So, for example, if staff are receiving a 3% pay increase, then there has to be a bit of awareness about what kind of pay increases senior management might get, accepting that 3% increase for a very good salary is still a substantial amount of money. So I think if the member convener intends to bring forward amendments for us to consider, assuming the bill goes forward, then clearly that process will unfold.
I appreciate that. And to take my point a bit broader, and it overlaps somewhat with John Mason's line of questioning around powers of compulsion in relation to information provision and the Dundee example. There have been two quite different points of view put to us, not just in this evidence session, but over the course of the last couple of years. So the position of certainly the EIS articulate this most clearly. They believe that the SFC has simply not exercised the powers already available to it in relation to various examples of poor governance and poor decision-making institutions. So not just about financial viability, but other examples, particularly around erosion of fair work principles, etc. The alternative position that the previous chief executive of the SFC articulated when I think the last time she gave evidence to us before she left that post was that the SFC had insufficient powers of compulsion in relation to institutions. The question that I put to a lot of the witnesses we've had to us so far has been about the question around clawback. So the SFC can claw back public money that has been provided to anyone that it funds. That's obviously an incredibly blunt tool, and in many situations it would actually make it worse, particularly when we're talking about financial crises. Do you think that the SFC, as a result of this bill, would have sufficient powers to be able to exercise appropriate influence? And do you accept the point that clawback is perhaps sometimes an effective stick to wield, but 9 times out of 10 is not going to be an effective means of enforcement, compulsion, however you want to word it?
The convener's looking at me because of time. That's fine. Because I want.
He's just intrigued. That's what it is.
Yeah. So it's an interesting one. I would say that when I first came into post, SFC sometimes used its powers in quite a broad brush approach. So if it saw a problem, it would take action and inform the whole sector there was a restriction being imposed. An example of that would be school-college partnerships, where an issue was identified with, I think, 7 colleges, and it issued an edict that said, we're going to cap this for everyone, which wasn't altogether helpful. I think, to be fair, it has become much more surgical in how it deploys the powers that it has. I think that's how it should be. It deals with individual instances where a problem arises. But I think, by and large, it has sufficient powers now. And I just want to caution, and it sounds like I'm sitting on the fence and I'm not, around the allegations that are sometimes made against colleges and college principals and the substance. Very often there's a grain of truth, but a lot of exaggeration. I think we've all seen instances of that. And that goes to the unhelpful atmosphere in some of the colleges, some individual colleges in particular, which is not helpful. One of the things I think that has gotten in the way of resolving some of these issues has been something we're going to deal with later this morning, convener, which is additional layers of bureaucracy, where the SFC have felt unable to take a lead on something because the regional body has first dibs, if you want, on that, and vice versa. Hopefully the committee will vote later today to remove those layers of bureaucracy, and that will leave the SFC a clear run, with the exception we still have one regional board, at dealing with some of these issues. And I think Andrew will back me up on this. I think there are opportunities in the bill around powers that could deal with issues specific to fair work. But I do stress again, allegations need to be proven before action can be taken. And on clawback, I'm not allowed to call it clawback, it's recovery, by the way. So, I think last year there were only 2 colleges subject to recovery. So the SFC has gotten away from taking money back for underperformance. That's been a direction of travel that was set by my predecessor, and you know how flexible we are trying to be to support colleges in these challenging times. So I don't think recovery is used as widely as a tool or in any other form as it once was. But there is no doubt
that there does need to be something short of that, because it's quite appropriately not used, because it would very often make the situation worse. But the SFC needs other tools at its disposal.
So I think to be accurate, I think SFC has been a little bit misunderstood and misrepresented. It has done a very good job over many years in managing both sectors. It's done it quite effectively. But all of us, particularly in the current circumstance, want to see greater transparency about what is happening in these sectors and how some of these issues are being dealt with. I agree with that ask. So I'm very open-minded in terms of amendments that the government might bring in conjunction with members at stage 2, by which point we will have greater information about Dundee in particular. But I should also have held back from the chairs of the institutions in Scotland, who have already raised 1 or 2 things with me they think that might be helpful. Whether we need legislation, I don't know at this stage. But we're absolutely open to doing anything that the committee and we feel might increase transparency and oversight. But what I'm not looking to do is to simply introduce measures for the sake of it. Yeah. That they need to be for a purpose and to an end.
I've just got one final point of clarity. University of Scotland raised this in their evidence. around the threshold for information sharing. So again, going back to John Mason's line of questioning, they were pointing out a bit of an inconsistency in the, certainly in the explanatory notes, that the general principle around where information should be shared seems to be set at quite a high threshold, but then the examples that were used were, they felt, or Sir Paul Grice certainly felt, that the examples seemed to be at a lower threshold than the principle that had been set out. So what they were looking for was just a bit of clarity, certainly an initial statement of clarity from the government around this, but also whether greater clarity could either be put in the bill or an assurance about what level of clarity will be put in the relevant regulations if it's not on the face of the bill.
So I think they're talking about the duty to notify the Scottish Funding Council of certain events that are specified in regulations, and I think that there'd be an affirmative procedure, those regulations. So it's not, it wouldn't be a. There's a process to go through in parliamentary scrutiny. There's an obligation to consult on them. And I don't think, so there's some sort of procedural reassurance, but also in terms of the kinds of things that the SFC would want to be notified of, there's a sort of reassurance in that nobody wants to create a bureaucracy or be overwhelmed with information flows. There'll be an incentive for everybody to get those thresholds set quite high, because it's about very significant events where the SFC, if they're told about something, could help take sort of really meaningful action. It's not about sort of low-level, sort of day-to-day. I think the point they were making was around that they've got to be able to just get on with the day-to-day administration of their businesses, for want of a better word. So hopefully that's reassuring.
I think that is helpful. They were also, and I have some sympathy with the University of Scotland position on this, looking for a bit more clarity on pretty much that point you've just made, Andrew, on the face of the bill, so that there's something clear there. Shouldn't be too specific. The point of regulation here is that it's more flexible, but something on the face of the bill just to give a sufficient degree of clarity over what kind of threshold we're setting here.
I'm not sure that's necessarily required for the face of the bill, but given the process that Andrew has laid out, we'll reflect upon that. But there's a balance to be struck here as well. This committee is rightly taking an interest in events at the University of Dundee, and the Parliament and wider society is entitled to develop a degree of confidence about the oversight of any and all of our institutions. So whilst Andrew's articulated very well that we're not talking about the minutiae of the day-to-day work of universities, there has to be, as I say, a balance struck here so that we can all be satisfied that the oversight is available to us for the use of public money.
Fair enough, Minister. I would broadly agree with that. I think they make a fair point about just wanting an understanding of what it is.
We will take that away and reflect on that.
Thanks, George. Thank you, Convener.
George Adam. Thank you, Convener. Hello again, Minister. One of the questions that I asked of private providers when they were here was, you've already said you're going to retain private providers as suppliers as well. One of the questions I asked is, what's your cut? What are you making? And one of the things that the Scottish, Northern Ireland and Northern Ireland Plumbing and Employers Federation said 40%. Now, it shocked us when we heard 40%, just without a thought. It just came out 40% cut, and they were not uncomfortable with that language, you know. And the whole point for me was, when you're living in a world where there is 80, I think colleges can deliver it on maybe 10 to 20% of part of their running costs, and you're also talking about the potential of double dipping, where a subcontractor will end up dealing with it down the line. It almost starts to smell like a cosy wee cartel for some of these companies. So surely that can't continue, Minister.
So can I just clarify something? I think you started by talking about private training providers. We're talking about managing agents, not private training providers, because they don't deliver the training, they subcontract them. So we should just be clear about that, because there's many fine private training providers out there. But I think I've been clear today about my concerns, my long-standing concerns about the role of managing agents. Now, I need to be very careful here in saying that there are some really welcome activities that some managing agents carry out, necessary activities. But the evidence that you received last week, and I commend you for getting that information out to them, because we found that more challenging over a period of time to get the
out
of all of the relevant bodies. I absolutely share the concern you tell me the committee has over it. I totally share it. The reality here, from my perspective, is quite concerning. And I'll give you a couple of examples, because your evidence certainly caught the interest of the college sector that you received. And I'm talking to a couple of colleges about this, and the numbers are really quite stark. If you look at one college where essentially they get 48% of the £8,700 that was referred to yourselves, but they then draw down over a 3-year period £16,000 of credits in order to deliver the training, because this plumbing is a particularly intensive course, sometimes 1 to 3 or even 1 to 1 as it goes through. And another college that I know of get 46% of the money, and they're pulling down £9,500. So essentially, in this instance, £5,000 of the money is retained, circa, and then the college credits are utilised to deliver that. I'm really uncomfortable about that as a use of public money. Now, the managing agents will tell you that they do lots of good stuff, and I can point to CITB, who are doing some really good collaborative work with us. So I don't have a black and white view of it. The English system is quite black and white, for example. It caps the amount of money that managing agents can retain.
I was going to ask you that, because I'd looked at that, and in England it's 15%.
Yes.
Are we looking at something like that?
Well, in England it's 15%. I think Wales has a system where you have to be a registered charity before you can do that. It's an option. It's an option if things don't get addressed. So this is something for to be developed as part of the new look apprenticeship model, and I certainly look forward to the committee's views on that. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. As I said, CITB is a good example of a collaborative managing agent, but these numbers are troubling. This is public money.
I can only go, Minister, on the evidence that we received and the people that are sitting in front of us, and for us to hear that 40% and the idea that there's a subcontractor and in some cases the subcontractor will end up the college anyway. They'll end up doing it, and what you've already told us, they're actually then kind of trying a way to fund it, while that 40% is in the skyrocket of that other organisation.
There are instances, oddly enough, of colleges being the subcontractor, colleges getting apprentices allocated to them, then using private providers. It is a system that I think we need to look at. What troubles me more than anything is we are doing extensive work with the college sector around enabling and empower them to use their credits more freely, to do what they need to do in their localities. And we're getting really good buy-in now around curriculum transformation. But I want them to have access to the maximum number of credits that are at their disposal to do that work. And if they are having to draw down these credits in order to deliver something that the public purse has largely, because it is a contribution to training, already provided, then from my perspective, that is something we've been looking at for some time. My team have certainly been in about this. I'm glad that the committee's taken an interest in it. I don't think it's an entirely black and white issue. There's perhaps a way to be found through this, but it's certainly something that we are taking a keen interest in.
Minister, as you're aware, life is always black and white with me, but that's just in football.
Well, that's your football allegiance, of course.
But you can understand the concern the committee have when you've heard something like that from an individual involved in the process. And as we all know, every single public penny is to be accounted for. And it seems extremely complicated, perhaps. I know you said this is a starting point, but it seems an extremely complicated way to deliver the training that we're needing.
So Andrew made a point a few moments ago about a system where the allocations go through a number of iterations, and at every point money comes out of the system because of costs that are incurred. I would, in principle, prefer a much more straightforward public money to the entity providing and get on with it. Now, that may not be entirely achievable under the new model, but I think we have a better chance of delivering that. Because ultimately, we're entitled to that level of transparency that we currently lack.
Okay. Okay. Last couple of things from me, Minister. Clearly, financial concerns have been well made from the committee members to yourself and your officials today. There are concerns within SDS about this as well. I understand they previously requested a letter of comfort for the SDS directors to be exempt from personal liability for any cost or financial deficits arising directly or indirectly from these reforms. Will the government provide that letter of comfort?
Sorry, could you give me a second?
Okay. Ms Martin.
Thank you. Sorry, I don't actually have that information immediately to hand, but I understand that under the terms and articles of their association, we didn't see an immediate concern for that, but I think suitable reassurances were offered that we'd continue work with them and we didn't see this as a material risk, but we just might need to provide a little bit more information on that to you because it's, it's not a recent thing we've looked at.
My understanding is they have written to the Director-General about it and have requested it for a second time. So clearly they've not been reassured by these reassurances. So that's something you can commit to looking into further.
We'll look into it and we'll go back to you.
Thank you. And just finally, are current SDS staff fully involved and engaged with everything the government are doing in the apprenticeship sphere at the moment?
The answer to that is not all SDS staff, no. But if I say to you that I, with the support of the Chair, met with two of the leading figures in the delivery of apprenticeships, and with his support asked them to do the pieces of work that I articulated. We await the return of that information. So no, not everybody who's working within SDS is there, but I am really keen to get as many of the relevant people engaged in this and absolutely shaping what the offering will be.
Because the board have got concerns that SDF staff appear to be excluded from workshops which fundamentally explore the shape of the reformed SFC and which they will be part of. Mr Mott.
Thank you. So I don't think that's quite accurate. We have started very recently arranging some workshops to help work out a delivery plan, and the relevant staff from the relevant public bodies have been invited to all those workshops. I think what
there's SDS staff are part of that?
They're part of that, yes.
So why would the board think that they've been excluded?
So I think there might be some misunderstanding because there are some workshops that are definitely that have happened where everyone has been invited, the workshops have happened, there are some ongoing, and then there's a list of workshops that are sort of much more tentative for the future, and we're still working out who's going to those, but nobody's been excluded. They're it's what we've asked all the public bodies to do is to suggest the topics they want to talk about, and we're collecting the information together. I think it's fair to say that SDS have raised a number of issues with us on a number of occasions, and the approach that we need to take is to work through those issues systematically. And so what we're trying to do is agree with the public bodies a delivery plan that takes us through the next couple of years, where we work through all the issues. But not every issue can be answered right away, either because it logically depends on another thing being resolved, and also bandwidth issues. We can't do everything at once. But what we've heard
given the
issues,
expertise that is within SDS, and I think we've all accepted that, and that's why these staff would move across to the SFC, because there is significant institutional memory there and good work. Can you give a commitment that should SDS staff or the board think their staff should be involved in any of these working groups, they would be guaranteed to be part of that, so they don't feel excluded?
So I would be troubled if there was a legitimate concern, I stress legitimate concern about that. Self-evidently, we want those staff with their expertise involved in shaping this. So if there is a workshop where there should be input from there, we wouldn't just welcome, we would encourage the involvement of SDS staff. And I should stress, quite often I want to hear from the staff who are working at the coalface, not necessarily senior management. When I go out on visits, I'm always keen to meet the staff who are delivering on the ground. So anybody who is deemed to be appropriate to those workshops, I give you that undertaking. We're absolutely committed to that.
That's a welcome reassurance. Minister, can I thank you and your officials for your time today? There is some follow-up information you'll be bringing to us, and some of it definitely ahead of stage 1 debate, which we welcome as well. And I will now suspend the meeting for about 10 minutes. Thank you. Welcome back. The next item on our agenda is consideration of subordinate legislation subject to the affirmative procedure, the Regional Strategic Bodies and Regional Colleges, Glasgow and Lanarkshire Order 2025 draft. The committee will take evidence on this instrument from the Minister and his officials, and the Minister will also move the motion to approve the instrument. Can I welcome Graham Day, Minister for Higher and Further Education and Minister for Veterans, Jess Doolan, Head of Institutional Governments and Reform, and Alison Martin, Solicitor. Minister, can I ask you to speak to the draft instrument?
Thank you, Convener. I'm delighted to be here today to discuss the Regional Strategic Bodies and Regional Colleges Glasgow and Lanarkshire Order 2025, which reforms the governance arrangements in the Glasgow and Lanarkshire College regions. The draft order makes amendments to existing legislation to abolish two regional strategic bodies, the Glasgow Colleges Regional Board and the Lanarkshire Board, and designates the three Glasgow colleges and South Lanarkshire College as regional colleges. I want to put on record my thanks to the Scottish Funding Council and those across the college sector who've helped shape the recommendations that have been made to the Government. I also want to acknowledge the committee's work on the inquiry into college regionalisation, which highlighted the success of the single college region model and need for reform of the regional strategic bodies in order to realise the original aims of college regionalisation. The Government has carefully considered the case for change, and I'm confident that this draft order delivers the right governance reforms to achieve our collective ambitions for the colleges in the Glasgow and Lanarkshire regions. It's imperative that colleges provide a high-quality, streamlined learning offering, an offer that is rooted in a robust understanding of local needs, as well as regional and national priorities. That is what Scotland's economy, its employers and its communities need from our colleges. And ensuring that colleges are equipped to fulfil their role as anchor institutions, it's crucial that we reflect on experience and the changing landscape to bring forward reforms that enable effective change. The regional strategic bodies in the Glasgow and Lanarkshire regions have played a key role in recent years, but the time is right to remove this additional layer of bureaucracy. This will allow the colleges to flourish under a single college region governance model and promote the college's ability to collaborate with the right partners. A robust accountability and assurance process that hold colleges to account is crucial. A direct funding and accountability relationship with the SFC as opposed to the regional strategic bodies, as well as the chair of the boards of the newly designated regional colleges being appointed by Scottish ministers, will achieve improved college accountability. I hope that the committee agrees that the draft order addresses many of the concerns set out in the committee's inquiry, and if approved, the reform arrangements will come into force on the 30th of July 2025, and I obviously welcome any questions the committee has.
Thank you very much. John Mason.
Thanks very much, Convener. Well, first of all, I very much welcome this. I think that's great that we're getting rid of the Glasgow Regional Board, and I'm delighted that the three colleges will be separate. Can you say anything about the idea of collaboration between the colleges going forward? Because while I want them to be independent, they will be independent, they will need to work together to some extent.
So, this was one of the areas I particularly explored in considering the action to take, Mr Mason, because not only did we want to encourage collaboration, we didn't want to get into a situation where there might be predatory behaviour or duplication of provision. And there was an existing informal structure between the colleges which facilitated that, and I was satisfied that the concerns that I might have had about what this led to were unjustified. The SFC will work with the colleges to develop appropriate collaborative arrangements which will be overseen in line with existing accountability and assurance processes and in compliance with statutory requirements. But I think one of the important things to consider is that it may not be the very obvious collaboration arrangements that you might think. If you're thinking specifically about your own area of Glasgow, that the three Glasgow colleges would collaborate, but actually through the Strategic Regional Planning Board, which I met with yesterday, they're working across a 6-college area with West College Scotland and the two Lanarkshire colleges. I know that there is some thought being given to more collaborative working between one of the Lanarkshire colleges and a Glasgow college, because the public transport links are better than they were between the two Lanarkshire colleges. So this absolutely facilitates greater collaboration of the type that I think you and we would be looking for. But the SSC will work with them to ensure that that is what takes place.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly hope that's the case. I mean, sometimes personalities come into these things, as we've discussed in previous sessions on other subjects. Do you think we've got a robust enough system that even if, you know, kind of whoever the heads or chairs of colleges are, will still be able to work?
If we take Glasgow as an example, Glasgow has 3 colleges specific to the city. 2 of them might be described as doing the typical type of community work that you would expect colleges to do, and that's their strength. The other one is quite unique. It is somewhere between a university and a college, and it is unique in having quite substantial commercial income. It has international students in a way that the other 2 don't attract. So I am confident, given the principles that are in place at the moment. We will, through the appointments of chairs, seek to ensure through that process that we attract the kind of strong individuals that I want to see chairing our colleges, the type of individuals who will hold principals to account, but will also see that bigger picture. And having listened to what I did in Glasgow yesterday around the skills planning work that's going on, I do think there is a coherent vision, not just for Glasgow, but for Lanarkshire and the area covered by West College Scotland.
Okay, thanks so much. Clear.
Convener, I very much support this. I think this will significantly improve college governance, but I'm just wondering, Minister, if you could give a bit of clarity around what the impact will be on the handful of staff involved. So I know Glasgow College's regional board has some really brilliant, highly skilled staff who, much as this is the right move in terms of overall governance and efficiency, their individual contributions have added a lot to the sector in recent years. Are they to be transferred to the individual colleges?
So, can I echo those sentiments and can I also acknowledge the impact that all of the talk around this over a number of years has had on those staff, and I don't think anyone who has been calling for these changes has implied any criticism of the staff who work for the regional body. My understanding is that all 5 staff affected have chosen to take voluntary redundancy. Right. There was, to be fair, a suggestion from the colleges that they would seek to offer employment opportunities. I'm not entirely sure if that happened, but it was certainly talked about. But all of the staff have chosen to take voluntary severance. But I do hope that the skills and talents that they showed might not be lost to the college sector ultimately.
If they've already taken voluntary packages, I won't pursue that further, but I'd echo your point that I hope that we can find a way to retain the skills and the knowledge that they've built up within the sector. But thank you.
Glancy.
Thank you, Convener. I share the concern, I guess, but also I appreciate the recognition that you've put on the record, or the Minister's put on the record today for those staff. So I just have 2 questions. My first is, what specifically is the Minister's vision for the coordinated approach, building on the answers that he gave to John Mason? How does it hope that the colleges in the region can work together to collaborate for the best opportunity for skills across the region? And secondly, some of the funds that were top sliced for the board, I think it's to the tune of about 500,000. When can colleges expect to see any of that funding in colleges in Glasgow specifically? So
I don't want to avoid answering the first part of the question, but as you know, as the member knows, I'm a great believer in empowering the colleges to deliver that vision and to have that vision, rather than ministers dictating what that should look like. And I have to say, from my visit to Glasgow yesterday, it was quite clear that there is a coherent vision being pulled together of the city and the wider area's needs. I was quite heartened by some of what's actually happening already, particularly around centres of excellence. So I think there is something there already that will be built upon, and I would have every confidence that it will certainly align with what that locality requires, but also, frankly, provide an example for other parts of the country about how you cooperate and collaborate. So that was heartening. On the point about the monies that will be raised, the member's quite right to talk about the topsoicing that took place to fund GCRB. My understanding, and Jess will correct me if I'm wrong here, is that there has been a topsoice of a sort for 25-26 retained. That is to cover any residual costs that are incurred in winding up that regional body. I think we anticipate that anything that's left at the conclusion of that would be returned to the colleges in November. Yep. Is when we're looking at. So they're already started to see if you like, the financial benefit of this. You'll appreciate we have to complete the winding up, and that should be concluded by November.
And in the following years, can colleges expect to have the additional, colleges in Glasgow expect to have the additional funding reflected in there?
Well, do you want to answer?
Well, allocations would take place through SFC as is the standard format. So each individual college will receive their individual allocation, and that allocation won't be top-sliced.
Okay. I think some of the concerns that the colleges might have is the planning for that transition, and then being able to engage in some of the activity that the Minister might have saw yesterday or discussed in that collaboration. So some of that may obviously have a cost attached. So I suppose it was just to identify that may be a need for each of the colleges going forward.
Well, they were already participating in this under the regional model, actively participating in it. And one of the areas that I explored yesterday was the need to, and I've done this in a number of forums, ensure that if economic planning in an area is such, whether it be city deals, green free ports, anything of that type, and on a more localised level, is taking place in it, account is taken of the need to factor in the cost that might be incurred by the colleges. And so there's additionality provided to meet the additional ask that may be required of the college in a specific area. And that was one of the areas that we discussed yesterday.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Minister, I just wondered about the time it's taken us to get here. So the government first asked the SFC to look at this in 2020. When they did, they said the current model was, the status quo was not tenable. Then this committee looked at it over 2 years ago, and in March 2023 concluded that what you're bringing forward today was the right approach. Is that the pace that we should be going at for something that is ultimately not particularly controversial?
Convener, if you know me, I'd work at quite a considerably greater pace on everything if I could. I think there were two complicating factors here. One of them is down to me. I wanted to satisfy myself, as I said earlier, that if we removed this level of oversight, that we would not get into a situation where there would be predatory behaviour, competitive behaviour. So I took a little bit of time around that. I actually met with all of the chairs and all of the principals to iron that out. Because the other complicating factor in this was that along came Withers in the midst of this, and we wanted to be assured...
Not really in the midst of this.
Well...
If we look at a 5-year period...
Well, as we were working through it, I'm not making excuses here, I've only been in post for 2 years. As we were working through this, we had advice from the SFC, as I recall. We wanted to test that advice given the kind of things that James Withers was asking for. Was that still their view? You'll also be aware that there have been some contentions in Glasgow as a city with college activity. We've alluded to earlier today about complaints, etc., etc. And just all round, I think we took probably longer than I would have wanted us to take, but I did want to be sure we got this right. And I think we've done that in the end.
And separately, what do you think this means for the future of UHI as now the only remaining body of this kind of structure? And are you satisfied that nothing should change, it's operating well, or do you have concerns that, as the last remaining one like this, that maybe has potential to change as well?
Well, Convener, there is extensive work underway to look at protecting the concept of UHI, but future-proofing it. So a little while after I came into post, I met with UHI Central, if you want to call it that. They outlined a vision of what reform might look like. I had some concerns about that. I think you might have as well, around making sure that the voice of the local delivery, the colleges, was heard and all of that. To their credit, they have done exactly that. There is a very, very extensive piece of work, redesign work, going on. I'm heartened that they appear to be taking people with them on this journey, which was essential. It has taken longer than I would have wanted again, but what I would anticipate is UHI coming back to government in due course, as soon as they're able to have firmed up that proposal. They'll have a business case, obvious for us to consider, but I'm keen to do whatever we can at pace to support UHI in ensuring that the concept is absolutely protected, but in a way that is sustainable for the long term. And I know that's the work that's going on across the colleges there.
And you said a couple of times as soon as possible. Do you have a timescale? Will it be in this Parliament or the next?
So I will write back to you on that, because I mean, we are in the hands of UHI in delivering that. And we're really determined by the pace that they will be able to get agreement on all of this. So let me reflect on that, and I'll come back to you, Convener.
Okay, thank you very much. If there are no other questions, then I invite the Minister to move the motion in his name, S6M 17468, that the Education, Children and Young People Committee recommends that the regional strategic bodies and regional colleges Glasgow and Lanarkshire Order 2025 draft be approved.
Moved, Convener.
Anything to add, Minister?
Sorry?
Anything to add?
No, not at all, Convener.
And any other comments from members? No. The question is that motion S6M 17468 in the name of Graham Day be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. That is agreed. The committee must now produce its report on this draft instrument. Is the committee content to delegate responsibility to me as convener to agree this report on behalf of the committee? Yes. Okay. I'm just checking. We were about to have a division on that, Mr Kidd. Thank you very much. That concludes the consideration of this instrument. Minister, can I thank you and your officials? And that concludes the public part of our proceedings, and the committee will now move into private session to consider its final agenda items. And I suspend this meeting.